Chapter 1301, The Final Battle Day. Chapter 1301, The Final Battle Day. With the tremendous improvement of his overall power, Jian Wushuang naturally felt more confident. After all, his power was now comparable with a peak universe god in the first heaven, and he was confident that his unique skill and swordsmanship would not be any weaker than universe god Qin Yang. In other words, his current self could fight face-to-face with universe god Qin Yang and the battle would be very close. No hurry. There's still half a year time. In this half a year, I will continue to digest the accumulation like before, and I can continue to improve my swordsmanship. Jian Wushuang smiled and took a seat. He started digesting his previous accumulation. The time flew and another half a year passed. The final battle that Jian Wushuang and universe god Qin Yang had agreed on finally arrived. In Dayu Palace, there was a training field right in the middle of the sect. The training field covered over 1,000,000 miles. It was enough for two universe gods to fight as ferociously as they wish. The training field was where Jian Wushuang and universe god Qin Yang would fight. At the surrounding of the training field, many inner disciples of Dayu Palace had gathered long ago. Not only them, but many experts from Scarlet Island, Holy Prefecture and also Golden Sun sect also rushed over too. A year ago, the news about the final battle between Jian Wushuang and universe god Qin Yang spread across the lands. Regardless if it was Jian Wushuang or universe god Qin Yang, both of them were famous in the world and both of them were real geniuses. A collision between geniuses naturally caught everyone's attention. In the void right before the training field, two thrones were towering side by side, which belonged to the master of Dayu Palace and Wusong. The two of them were universe gods in the third heaven. Hence, they were naturally above the others. At that very moment, both of them were looking at the training field below. They could recognize the young figure who stood right in the middle of the training field. Universe god Qin Yang arrived long ago. Where's Jian Wushuang? It's already this time and he still hasn't shown up yet? The master of Dayu Palace found it strange. The people surrounding the training field found it strange too. It's already time, why hasn't Jian Wushuang show up? Is he afraid? Very likely. He only agreed to fight with universe god Qin Yang out of an impulse decision. When he calmed down, he must have realized how foolish his decision was. That's why he's not showing up. Hee. Not showing up is also a good choice. It's better than losing his life in the battle. People started talking among themselves. While on the other side, the experts from Scarlet Island saw that Jian Wushuang had yet to show up and they were surprised too. Then, the master of Scarlet Island walked towards where Jian Wushuang was living personally. The master of Scarlet Island knew where Jian Wushuang was soon after he arrived at the huge courtyard where Jian Wushuang resided. They are going to fight now and he's still in the secret room? The master of Scarlet Island shook his head and shouted, Jian Wushuang. His voice went through regulations outside the secret room and traveled into Jian Wushuang's ears, who was quietly cultivating in seclusion in the secret room. Jian Wushuang was still sitting in the secret room with his eyes closed. He was still digesting the accumulated nature of swordsmanship with full attention. He suddenly heard the master of Scarlet Island shouting for him, and he couldn't help but crease his eyebrows and finally open his eyes. Oh, it's time? Jian Wushuang let loose his tightly knitted eyebrows and exited the secret room. Island Master. Jian Wushuang smiled and greeted the master of Scarlet Island outside the secret room. Jian Wushuang, today is the day you fight against universe god Qin Yang. Everyone is waiting for you at the training field, but you are happy here. You're not even anxious, still cultivating leisurely in the secret room, the master of Scarlet Island teased. Jian Wushuang laughed. I'm just too caught up in cultivation and forgot about the time. Everyone outside was saying that you're not showing up for the battle as you are afraid to fight against the universe god Qin Yang, the master of Scarlet Island said. Afraid? Jian Wushuang smiled. Jian Wushuang, have never been afraid of a battle ever since I was born. In fact, I am quite excited for it. Jian Wushuang said casually, but his eyes were beaming with excitement. When he was in the Green Fire world, he had already heard about Universe God Qin Yang from Jiushi. After he came to Dayu world, Universe God Qin Yang's name had long resounded in his ears. The countless cultivators in Dayu world said that he was the top genius in Dayu world, said that he was the #1 among Universe God in the first heaven. Jian Wushuang had heard those claims countless times. Maybe due to his fame, Jian Wushuang was dying to fight a battle against him. 1 year ago, before he achieved such a huge breakthrough in his power, he already accepted the challenge delightedly. Then, when his power increased tremendously, he was even more excited to fight against Universe God Qin Yang. He also wanted to see how strong the #1 Universe God in the first heaven of Dayu world was. Jian Wushuang, when you arrive at the training field, look for the master of Dayu Palace before you fight. Let him return to you your Blaze Quicksand Gourd. He shan't reject your request. With Blaze Quicksand Gourd in your hand, your power could be a notch stronger and there's a higher chance of winning against Universe God Qin Yang, the master of Scarlet Island said. Blaze Quicksand Gourd? Jian Wushuang shook his head. I don't need Blaze Quicksand Gourd now. Don't need? You're so confident? The master of Scarlet Island creased his eyebrows. Just watch me, Jian Wushuang smiled. As they chatted, they arrived at the training field. The moment he arrived at the training field, countless pairs of eyes looked at him. It's Jian Wushuang. He's finally here. He really dared to come here? I thought he ran away. The inner disciples from Dayu Palace immediately became noisy. Jian Wushuang. The Golden Sun Sect master and a few universe gods from Golden Sun Sect gathered together. The Golden Sun Sect master stared at Jian Wushuang coldly. Although he couldn't be certain that Jian Wushuang was the person who killed his son, Jin Feng, he was at least 70% sure that Jian Wushuang had something to do with Jin Feng's death. At first, I wanted to find a chance to capture that kid and question him with regards to how Feng died. But from how it looks, I'm afraid I might not have that chance, the Golden Sun Sect master sighed. On the other corner, the few universe god from Holy Prefecture saw Jian Wushuang's arrival and their gazes turned cold too, especially the universe god Jiuhai. This boy is Jian Wushuang. How dare you kill my disciple? I'll watch how you die today. The universe god Jiuhai's intention to kill was soaring. Universe god Qin Yang, who had been standing calmly in the middle of the training field, sent a cold gaze when he saw Jian Wushuang arrived. You're finally here? Universe god Qin Yang held his fists tight and lifted his head to look at the void before him. He saw that the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Tsang suddenly appeared in the space. Jian Wushuang. You're lucky. Although you're not that strong, you should feel honored to be the stepping stone that allows me to enter the Snow Dojo. In this battle, fully prepare yourself as my stepping stone. Chapter 1302, A Pitched Battle. Chapter 1302, A Pitched Battle. In the middle of the training field, Jian Wushuang and universe god Qin Yang were standing opposite one another. The universe was in silence. The surrounding people held their breath as they watched the battle. The Blood Mountain sword had already appeared in Jian Wushuang's hand, while the black sickle had appeared in universe god Qin Yang's hand. The desire to fight soared in both their eyes. I have been looking forward to this battle. Jian Wushuang pointed at his opponent with the tip of his blade. Universe god Qin Yang, I hope you don't disappoint me. I will grant your wish. Universe god Qin Yang lifted the corner of his lips and smiled coldly as he thought to himself. This battle, I must bring all my skills into play, but I can't kill Jian Wushuang straight away, right at the beginning. I have to do it slowly. Then, universe god Qin Yang partially reigned in his divine power on purpose. He then took action before everyone's gaze. From a far-off distance, universe god Qin Yang gripped the black sickle and swung. Buzz! The shadow of the huge blade suddenly unveiled the effect of its divine power. It formed a beautiful, mighty river of surging blades. The blade river was crimson and it looked extremely beautiful in the void. Such a strong stroke. So exquisite. He just performed such an exquisite stroke so casually. The surrounding spectators saw the crimson blade river and showed terrified expressions. They could tell that the stroke that universe god Qin Yang did was very exquisite. Looking at the crimson blade river surging towards him, Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows slightly. He intentionally suppressed his divine power and wanted to defeat me with unique skill techniques? Jian Wushuang snorted. Regardless of how luxurious the river blade was, Jian Wushuang found the power ordinary. It was obvious that universe god Qin Yang had the ability to control his divine power. Break! Jian Wushuang spat one word lightly, with a calm expression. At the same time, he waved the Blood Mountain sword downwards casually. With a casual stroke, Jian Wushuang didn't even use any swordsmanship. But the sword light swung out and directly cut the beautiful blade river that was approaching him in half. The surging, divine power collapsed and dispersed into all four directions. Ha! Universe god Qin Yang's expression changed. He never expected that Jian Wushuang could resolve that stroke so easily. Universe god Qin Yang, Jian Wushuang spoke with a loud and bright voice. Don't hide, bring your all. Otherwise, it would be meaningless even if I defeat you. In a year, your power increased this tremendously compared to before? Universe god Qin Yang smirked. If so, I shall grant you your wish then. Just as he finished speaking, rumble, there was a vast expanse of aura that surged from universe god Qin Yang, which was obviously much stronger than before. Then, universe god Qin Yang took action again. The same beautiful surging blade river swept out, but the difference was that the crimson blade river contained a significantly stronger divine power. Dragon lightning. Universe god Qin Yang roared and wielded the sickle in his hand. In the crimson blade river was an enormous amount of divine power surging fiercely. Suddenly, it took the shape of a humongous blood dragon. The blood dragon had 5 claws and it was huge in size. After it took shape, it roared and it flowed towards Jian Wushuang in the form of flowing a crimson current. Jian Wushuang saw, then he took a huge stride forward and swung the Blood Mountain sword at the void before him. That stroke stabbed right at the throat of the blood dragon that was attacking with such swift action. A terrifying, strangling power burst out and the blood dragon was suddenly torn into pieces. Universe god Qin Yang watched as the blood dragon collapsed. He couldn't be bothered. His gaze was cold and tremendous divine power surged, then he shouted again. Thousand Dragons Lightning. Roar! Countless roars were suddenly heard across the universe. Among the huge crimson blade river, boundless divine power formed one blood dragon one after another. All the blood dragons had 5 claws and were all huge in size. The power didn't seem to be any weaker compared to the blood dragon before. He looked and there were countless thousands of blood dragon that appeared from the crimson blade river. The blood dragons plunged towards Jian Wushuang from all directions with great momentum. Everyone who was watching showed terror in their eyes at the sight. They could tell that every blood dragon from the blade river equaled a full blow of a peak universe god in the first heaven. There were more than 1,000 of them charging towards Jian Wushuang, and it was like more than 1,000 attacks from a peak universe god in the first heaven. It was reckoned that there weren't many who could endure such a terrifying move among universe gods in the first heaven. Looking at the blood dragons charging from all directions, Jian Wushuang didn't seem anxious at all. He stood there with his hand holding onto his sword as his soul power diffused. He looked at all the attacks hemming him in and he took action. Wow. There were cold and brutal sword lights that swung out and Jian Wushuang expelled them rather casually. However, after it was sent out from the Blood Mountain sword, every single stroke was like a full blow of a peak universe god in the first heaven, and even slightly stronger. His swordsmanship was swift and it easily dismissed the blood dragons. The blood dragons collapsed one after another. The dispersed divine power became an impactful force and spread all around insanely. Boring. Jian Wushuang, who was in the middle of the training field, sighed and his gaze turned cold. Wow. A sword light with a string of boundless vigor and hope suddenly appeared from nowhere. It was the unique skill that Jian Wushuang created, Nirvana. After cultivating for a year, Jian Wushuang had a brand new foundation of understanding toward swordsmanship. Nirvana was enhanced again, and it could be considered the top peak rank 1 unique skill. The terrifying sword light gave out earth-shattering power. Suddenly, it shattered all the blood dragons before him along the Crimson Blade River that filled the void. He broke a walkway in the Crimson Blade River. That very moment, Jian Wushuang was holding his imposing gaze. Then, his body turned illusionary and he appeared before Universe God Qin Yang via the walkway that he broke earlier. Chant of disturbance. Jian Wushuang swung his stroke like a flash of lightning. The blade whistled and reverberated, and it was an extremely shrill noise. The sword light affected the space and was aimed at Universe God Qin Yang when it hit. At the instant that the blade whistled, a terrifying soul attack landed a heavy hit on Universe God Qin Yang. Although Universe God Qin Yang was strong, the sudden soul attack made his face change. Under the effect of soul attack, a terrifying swordsmanship was raining down. Chapter 1303, 3 Extra Moves. Chapter 1303, 3 Extra Moves. Clang! There was a loud clash at the crucial moment. Universe God Qin Yang swung the black sickle in his hand and blocked Jian Wushuang's attack. The strong power exploded from the sword and cast Universe God Qin Yang off. He was flung off tens of thousands of miles due to the impact, but he barely stopped and his complexion was obviously pale. Everyone who was watching the battle saw the sight and was surprised. At first, I thought it would be a battle with no suspense. However, when they started fighting, Universe God Qin Yang was at a disadvantageous position. Universe God Qin Yang was cast off by Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang has the advantage. Everyone was surprised. They found it unbelievable. After all, there was no one who believed that Jian Wushuang could be Universe God Qin Yang's match before the battle. Everyone was merely wondering about how long Jian Wushuang could survive under Universe God Qin Yang's attack. However, the scene before their eyes was beyond their expectations. The two of them fought and Jian Wushuang had the upper hand in the end and cast Universe God Qin Yang off. Jian Wushuang, it seems like I belittled you. Universe God Qin Yang could feel the surrounding strange looks and his face grew grave. A year ago, your power was probably close to a peak Universe God in the first heaven. Any peak Universe God in the first heaven should be able to win against you. But now your power has increased to such a level. I'm afraid even Chu Shao couldn't be your match now too. Universe God Qin Yang didn't hide his voice and everyone could hear him clearly. What he said stirred a discussion among the spectators. Amongst the crowd, Chu Shao from Diu Palace was standing there too. His eyebrows were tightly knitted and he mumbled, Jian Wushuang, his power has surpassed me. He found it unbelievable. In a year's time, Jian Wushuang had improved so tremendously. Not just him, almost everyone at the scene found it hard to believe. In a year's time, your strength increased tremendously. Jian Wushuang, I am really curious, how did you do it? Was it because of the chess game? Universe Qin Yang said and looked towards Jian Wushuang. How many moves did you resolve in the Little Scattered Stars game? The surrounding spectators too looked towards Jian Wushuang. Especially those inner disciples of Diu Palace. Then, only they remembered that Jian Wushuang didn't disclose the number of moves he resolved a year ago. No one else knew how far in the Little Scattered Stars game he had managed to get in the 10 years duration. Until then, Universe God Qin Yang only thought of asking after seeing Jian Wushuang's tremendous improvement in a year. Jian Wushuang didn't intend to answer Universe God Qin Yang's inquiry, but the master of Diu Palace, who was in the void in front of the training field, laughed and cut in. I know how many moves did Jian Wushuang resolved. Just like you, he studied the chess game for 10 years. But in the end, the number of moves that he resolved was 3 higher than your total, Qin Yang. The master of Diu Palace replied so lightly, but Universe God Qin Yang heard it and it sounded so jarring. 3 more moves than me? Universe God Qin Yang's eyes were wide open. The surrounding inner disciples were surprised too. Universe God Qin Yang resolved 32 moves in 10 years and he made 3 more moves than Universe God Qin Yang. Doesn't it mean that he resolved 35 moves? As a Universe Master, he resolved 35 moves in 10 years? Is this a joke? Didn't the Palace Master said that the chess game was restrained by one's level? Wasn't there too many moves for a Universe Master to resolve? How could he resolve more moves than Universe God Qin Yang? Jian Wushuang is so low profile. He resolved 35 moves, which was much better than Universe God Qin Yao, but when he came out from the secret room back then, he didn't even say a word. If Universe God Qin Yang didn't ask, we wouldn't know the exact numbers of moves he had resolved in the game. No wonder Jian Wushuang could improve so tremendously in a year. It turned out that he was the one who had the biggest harvest from the chess game back then. The inner disciples of Dayu Palace were astonished. Universe God Qin Yang and Chu Shao were both left speechless. When they had resolved the chess game, both of them were arrogant and resolved the chess game before everyone. Then only they realized that Jian Wushuang who was in the secret room was the real monster, a monster who was countless times more amazing than them. Jiang Wushuang, you are only a Universe Master but you resolved 35 moves in the chess game. That's really impressive. Universe God Qin Yang looked cold as he stared at Jian Wushuang. Even though he didn't admit defeat, he couldn't deny the fact that a Universe God in the first heaven only managed to resolve 32 moves in the Little Scattered Stars game, even when he gave his all. However, Jian Wushuang who was just a Universe Master could resolve 3 more moves than to him. Well, it's better this way. If you were to be too weak, I'd be constrained when I fight against you. But now, I can give my all and fight with you. Jian Wushuang, you should feel honored. Forget about Universe Gods in the second heaven or above. You are the only one who is qualified for me to give my all to fight against in Dayu world. Jian Wushuang, enjoy your last moments. You are going to die soon. Universe God Qin Yang's voice was cold, and every single word reverberated in the universe. Once again, the entire universe was in silence. Everyone held their breath and looked at Universe God Qin Yang. Everyone knew that Universe God Qin Yang was going to give his all in the fight. Among the crowd, Chu Shao held his fists tight and bit his lip. 1 year ago, he exerted himself to the utmost when he fought with Universe God Qin Yang, but he didn't manage to force him to fight with him all out. But then, Universe God was finally going to give his all. He's finally giving his all? The master of Dayu Palace in the void smiled faintly while Wu Tsang next to him was still calm. Hearing what Universe God said, Jian Wushuang's lip twitched into a smile and the excitement in his eyes grew abundantly. I'd like to see. You, who is recognized as the #1 Universe God in the first heaven by countless cultivators, how strong are you exactly? Come on. Jian Wushuang's calm voice was heard across the universe. Humph. There was a faint flash in Universe God Qin Yang's eyes. With a low humph, his body became illusionary before everyone's eyes. At first, there was only one Universe God Qin Yang on the training field. But the very next moment, there were more than a dozen of Universe God Qin Yang. Chapter 1304, All Out. Chapter 1304, All Out. Wow. A dozen of Universe God Qin Yang appeared on the training field from nowhere. Every Universe God Qin Yang looked identical, without any difference. The dozen Universe God Qin Yangs besieged Jian Wushuang in the middle. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. At the border of the training field, there was a sudden commotion. Oh my God! A dozen Universe God Qin Yangs? This should be a secret skill. But the secret skill is very impressive. Those illusionary figures were hard to differentiate. I, Universe God in the second heaven, couldn't even identify his original body among these figures. The noise resounded in the universe. Everyone was terrified. Even the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Tsang who were seated in the void above the training field were shocked too. The secret skill is quite bizarre. Even I couldn't identify his original body among them. Wu Tsang's, can you tell? The master of Dayu Palace asked. He's just standing there without making a move. I can't differentiate them as well. Wu Tsang shook his head and said, but if he were to take action, the moment he makes a hit, there'd definitely be divine power. By then, we should be able to tell which is his original body. A dozen universe god Qin Yang stood around Jian Wushuang. He couldn't tell which was the original body and which were illusionary clones of universe god Qin Yang. Jian Wushuang. Die! The dozen universe god Qin Yangs spoke simultaneously and his voice came from all directions. From the voices, they still couldn't tell which was the original body of universe god Qin Yang. Then, the dozen universe god Qin Yang took action before everyone's gaze. Those universe god Qin Yangs slowly raised the black sickles in their hands. The moment they raised their sickles, a strong power soared up into the sky. The shocking part was that the power was derived from all directions as well. The divine power that soared up felt the same. They carried an aura of fierce divine power. Wu Tsang and the master of Dayu Palace creased their eyebrows. I can't tell. Even when he took action, I can't tell which one is his original body. Such an amazing secret skill, Wu Tsang said softly. There were many secret skills that could create illusionary figures in eternal chaotic world. Forget about the eternal chaotic world, Jian Wushuang had even encountered some in the green fire world. However, even with the same kind of secret skill, the difference was ridiculously vast. The secret skill that universe god Qin Yang was performing, even the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Tsang couldn't tell which was his original body. It was really amazing. If he can't identify the original body, he wouldn't be able to identify which attacks are real and which are fake. How could he withstand the attacks then? The master of Dayu Palace was shocked. Jian Wushuang is in big trouble, Wu Tsang said. Everyone around the training field was in terror. The experts from Scarlet Island were worried for Jian Wushuang. They thought Jian Wushuang was in a very bad situation. While on the training field, Jian Wushuang, who was surrounded by dozens of universe god Qin Yang, looked fairly calm. He didn't reveal one bit of terror. Die! The shrill scream spread from all directions. Universe god Qin Yang prepared for his attack and the dozen of universe god Qin Yang slammed down the black sickle in their hands. Suddenly, there was over a dozen pitch-black faint lights that permeated the air in a similar manner and charged at Jian Wushuang from all directions. Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted and he squeezed the Blood Mountain sword in his hand, but his eyes were fixed on one of the sword lights. Then, he lifted his sword and swung it straightforwardly. Swoosh! The sword light swept and collided directly with that faint light. Dang! A deep clashing sound immediately resounded in the void. What? Everyone around the training field was caught by surprise, including the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Tsang in the void, who revealed a shocking expression. Even though the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Tsang were both universe god of the third heaven, they couldn't differentiate the fake and real attack from where they were standing. But then, Jian Wushuang took action and found the real attack straight away. Shattered. The void was torn and there was an enormous amount of divine power dispersing. Humph! Jian Wushuang snorted and charged forward. He immediately appeared before one of the universe god Qin Yang. Then he swung the Blood Mountain sword directly. The universe god Qin Yang before Jian Wushuang immediately revealed an expression of disbelief. How is it possible? How could he know which is my original body? This technique, even universe god in the second heaven couldn't differentiate. Even for universe god in the third heaven, if they were to only watch from the side, they might not be able to differentiate. But Jian Wushuang, he was just a universe master. He could see through my technique and find my original body with one glance? Universe god Qin Yang was extremely shocked, but he quickly responded. So what if you found my original body? You still have to die. Universe god Qin Yang's glare was cold and the surrounding illusionary figure vanished immediately. There was suddenly a black secret pattern that rapidly emerged on his body. The black secret pattern surfaced and it covered his body in that instant. It even covered the black sickle of his hand. With the black secret pattern, his aura, which was already fierce, became even more ferocious. Kill! Universe God Qin Yang swung his black sickle and suddenly clashed with Jian Wushuang's. Then, they were having close combat. Clash, 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 clash. The continuous clashing sound reverberated in the universe. It was so loud that every clash was deafening. Both Jian Wushuang and Universe God Qin Yang's power erupted entirely. Jian Wushuang gave full play to his power and triggered the second layer of power in his blood-killing plate armor. Most importantly, after his Blood Mountain Sword integrated with Eternal Lightning, the power of the Blood Mountain Sword increased tremendously. When Jian Wushuang let out his power entirely, his power could be one notch above an ordinary peak Universe God in the first heaven. As for Universe God Qin Yang, after the black secret pattern surfaced, his divine power erupted entirely and it was not any weaker than Jian Wushuang's. Both their strengths were comparable. Hence, they could only compete on their techniques, swordsmanship, strokes, and killing power. But both of them were even competing on their madness. Bang! The loud clash broke out and a corner of the void was broken in the next moment. The speed that both of them fought was extremely quick. The people watching around looked and stunned. Even the universe gods in the second heaven were shocked by the ferocious battle. Fierce. Mad. Terrifying. That battle was hardly seen in a billion years within the world. The sky was bellowing while the land was shaking. The battle was really earth-shattering. Chapter 1305, Life and Death. Chapter 1305, Life and Death. Rumble. There was suddenly a rumble in the middle of the training field. It was like lightning, but two figures tumbled from the twisted space. Soon, both figures stood steady on their feet. That very moment, the two figures, the luxurious, long robe that Universe God Qin Yang was wearing was torn. His hair was messy and his aura was much weaker than before. He looked as though he was in a bind. While Jian Wushuang was covered in scarlet armor. His face was only exposed when he stood straight. However, he looked a little pale then too. There was also blood at the corner of his lips, but the intention to fight became extremely vigorous. The spectators saw the scene and gulped a breath of cold air. They could tell how ferocious the fight was. From the result, it seemed that the two of them were equally capable. Jian Wushuang could fight Qin Yang to this point. People from Holy Prefecture, including Universe God Jiuhai and the few experts from Holy Prefecture, creased their eyebrows. They knew clearly that Universe God Qin Yang possessed terrifying power and he was definitely unmatched among the universe gods in the first heaven in the world. However, they never expected that Jian Wushuang, who was just a universe master, could push Universe God Qin Yang to that state. They originally thought Jian Wushuang would no doubt die in the battle. Many of the others thought so too. But now, no one dared to say so anymore. Whether or not Universe God Qin Yang would win the battle had already become questionable, let alone whether if Universe Qin Yang could kill Jian Wushuang. In the middle of the training field, Jian Wushuang looked at his opponent with his shining eyes. Universe God Qin Yang, your strongest power is just this? Jian Wushuang's voice was cold. He was looking forward to the battle. Even though the power that Universe God Qin Yang displayed was very ferocious and it was far stronger than when he was fighting against Chu Xiao and the others, he still fought a close match. The power that Universe God Qin Yang displayed had yet to force him to his extreme. With such power, it's insufficient. Universe God Qin Yang, you should have a stronger power. Show me. Jian Wushuang roared. In the heated battle earlier, he could tell that Universe God Qin Yang was still holding on to his last card. Universe God Qin Yang, who calmed down in the void, lifted his head and fixed his gaze at Jian Wushuang. There was rage in his eyes. If I'm right, you should still have a stronger force that you have yet to reveal. Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded and admitted directly. If so, we shall decide the victory or defeat with our next stroke. At the same time, it shall decide whether we will be meeting our life or death. Universe God Qin Yang said coldly. Let's do it. Jian Wushuang's eyes were beaming in excitement. A simple exchange of words between the two stirred the emotions among the spectators. The two of them are finally going to decide winning and losing. Not only that, it is going to be life and death too. I wonder who will be the last one standing. The both of them have already displayed such terrifying power. What other measures have they yet to reveal? Countless exclamations were heard. Before, there had definitely been no one who expected Jian Wushuang to win, thinking that he would definitely lose and no doubt, die. However, the pitched battle continued till then and no one dared to make such assumptions anymore. More measures. The master of Dayu Palace and Wu Zong in the void squinted their eyes and focused. In the middle of the training field. Jian Wushuang, my next move was created after I accumulated 1,000 years of training and followed by 40 years of seclusion cultivation. Its name is Ninth Heaven Crimson Moon. Universe God Qin Yang said coldly. Ninth Heaven Crimson Moon? Jian Wushuang nodded in silence and then gripped the Blood Mountain sword in his hand as he said, the next particular stroke was created in the past 1 year through digestion of accumulated experience from resolving the chess game. Its name is Eternal Light. Hee, let's see if it's my Ninth Heaven Crimson Moon or your Eternal Light that is stronger. Universe God Qin Yang smirked and took a huge stride forward. As everyone held their breath and watched, Universe God Qin Yang took action. He swung the black sickle with both his hands and a vast, surging divine power poured into the sickle. The originally pitch-black sickle suddenly turned crimson. But a cloud of bloody mist filled the air. There had clearly been no deaths in the training field before, and when the bloody mist filled the air, there was a terrifying stench that spread across. That smell was so pungent that it made one sick. In the middle of the bloody mist, Universe God Qin Yang's eyes became bloodshot red too, while his face was distorted. The black sickle that reached the limit of accumulation suddenly slashed. Wow! A radiant red sword light suddenly slashed. The sword light was so swift that it tore the sky and formed a strange arc, just like the moon hanging above the ninth heaven at night. But the moon was a crimson moon. The bloody mist soared up into the sky. The crimson moon hung in the sky with a boundless murderous intention. That was the strongest stroke created by Universe God Qin Yang, who was the #1 genius in Dayu world after 1,000 years of accumulation and 40 years of cultivation in seclusion, Ninth Heaven Crimson Moon. Just as the crimson moon swept down, the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Zong, who was in the void watching from afar, looked shocked. That is one of the strongest unique skills? The master of Dayu Palace spoke first. It was really the strongest unique skill. Even though it was only a rank 1 strongest unique skill, he's considerably good to have been able to create that. Wu Zong nodded faintly. In Eternal Chaotic World, the unique skills of a universe god was categorized into 3 ranks, and every rank would have 3 levels: beginner, advanced, and peak. Using the rank 1 unique skill as an example, most of the peak universe gods in the first heaven created peak rank 1 unique skills, but they could only create unique skill of that level. However, there were some exceptions. A real genius with a higher level of comprehension could try to create the rank 1 strongest unique skill. But to create the strongest unique skill, the threshold was extremely high. Not only does one has to have a high level of comprehension and luck, but he also has to be of Dao Master level and at least created strongest sword principle. But how many could among Dao Masters who could create strongest sword principle? That's why it was rare to see a strongest unique skill. The stroke that Universe God Qin Yang slashed was obviously a rank 1 strongest unique skill. After Universe God Qin Yang slashed, Jian Wushuang, who stood quietly in the void, suddenly gave out an unprecedented light. He quickly grabbed the Blood Mountain sword and swung fiercely. Swoosh! The sword moved and the sword light flashed. It moved the universe that instant and a terrifying power erupted. A brilliant light that people were intoxicated by lit up the sky. At the moment when the light lit up, the master of Dayu Palace and Wu Zong's eyes contracted again. The stroke is also a rank 1 strongest unique skill. Chapter 1306, You Ask for It. Chapter 1306, You Ask for It. Scary Crimson Moon. A brilliant light that symbolized eternity. The two rank 1 strongest unique skills collided directly before countless surprised gazes. Bang! The earth shook. The sky lost its color in front of the two unique skills. The entire boundless training field was covered by the crimson moon and beautiful eternal light. Rumble. Another deafening rumble was heard. Everyone surrounding the border of the training field was left dumbfounded. Even though there was quite a distance between them and the core of the training field, they could still feel the terrifying power of the two unique skills. The two people in the pitched battle were a peak universe god in the first heaven while the other one was a universe master. But the power that was given out from the collision between the two was enough to astonish all the universe gods in the first heaven. Even universe gods in the second heaven didn't dare to belittle them. Crack, crack, crack. The void continuously cracked as the terrifying crimson moon and the brilliant eternal light clashed ferociously together at the core of the training field. The two of them gave full play to their strongest unique skill, and they are so well matched. They are well matched. The power of the unique skills that they created are very similar. This is a competition of endurance. The surrounding spectators marveled at the sight. They saw that although the direct collision of two unique skills caused an earth-shattering effect, they couldn't determine a win or loss, but they were in a stalemate situation. Yes, it's a stalemate. Jian Wushuang's gaze was cold while the surging power raged towards the sword continuously. His blood mountain sword was trembling vigorously as it gave out terrifying power. As for universe god Qin Yang, he was clenching his teeth, his face was distorted and divine power all over his body was pouring down. The two of them were giving their all to pull off their strongest stroke, but no one could crush the other person directly. Then, the two of them were playing an endurance game. They were competing who could resist longer, who was more extensive. A universe master and a universe god in the first heaven to compete on their strength and resistance. It was obviously not going to work. However, Jian Wushuang was no ordinary universe master, he had done inverse cultivation. The strength of inverse cultivation was fundamentally stronger. The most important part was that King of Venomous Worms existed in Jian Wushuang's body. King of Venomous Worms had been recovering his soul power quickly. He was not afraid of competing for endurance. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The two strong forces charged forward again and again. The longer they pushed, the bigger the expense of power. Universe god Qin Yang had blood at the corner of his lips, but his face revealed insanity. How is it possible? I am a peak universe god in the first heaven. How could I not win against a universe master? Impossible, I won't believe this. Universe god Qin Yang looked ferocious, just like a raging beast. His eyes were flashing with anger too. He wasn't willing to believe, but the truth was before him. He lost an enormous amount of divine power after such a mad collusion. He already couldn't continue. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang, who was opposite him, was still fierce and strong and obviously hadn't reached his limit yet. If the situation were to persist, he would definitely lose the battle. I fight this battle to show Lord Wu Tsang. I want to receive Lord Wu Tsang's recognition. I want to go to Snow Dojo. Jian Wushuang should be just a stepping stone for me to prove my ability. Qin Yang, how could I be defeated by a stepping stone? I can't lose. I can't lose. Universe god Qin Yang was twinkling with an unprecedented madness, and he was roaring from the bottom of his heart. The next moment he thought of an idea, flipped his hand, and there was a cinnabar elixir that appeared. Looking at the cinnabar elixir, there was a flash of coldness in universe god Qin Yang's eyes. He didn't hesitate to take the elixir straight away. All the spectator was shocked at the sight. He ate the elixir. In a 1-to-1 battle, he had an elixir. The elixir just now seems to be blood coagulating elixir. Blood coagulating elixir. The moment the elixir's name was exclaimed, everyone was taken by surprise. Blood coagulating elixir was an elixir that took on one's blood as an expense in order to increase their power tremendously in a short period of time. If a universe god in the first heaven were to consume blood coagulating elixir, he could normally increase his power by 30%. If the price wasn't huge, the increased power wouldn't be vast as well. If it were to be a war, it's natural for universe god Qin Yang to take a blood coagulating elixir. However, it was a one-to-one battle that was happening before everyone's eyes. Even if he won the battle, it was because his power increased with the aid of elixir but not his own power. He had a blood coagulate elixir? Such a low trick. Universe god Qin Yang is so shameless. Everyone was raging. The master of Dayu Palace and Wu Zong, who were in the void above, too creased their eyebrows. Universe god Qin Yang, who had blood coagulate elixir, suddenly increased in divine power, and the huge crimson moon that originally couldn't hold on suddenly became stronger too. Jian Wushuang, die! Universe god Qin Yang bellowed, and his hysterical voice reverberated in the universe. The huge crimson moon rumbled, and there was a tremendous power and surged over. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang's brilliant, eternal light retreated. Jian Wushuang felt the pressing power and his face grew grave. Universe god Qin Yang, you asked for it. Jian Wushuang's eyes were washed with murderous intention. The moment he let out a bellow, the power of star that was hidden in his body suddenly surged. The secret skills of Star Palace suddenly erupted. The secret skills of Star Palace had always been Jian Wushuang's trump card. Plus, due to the first volume of the secret skills of Star Palace, his power of star could be accumulated again. The previous time he played the secret skills of Star Palace was to kill the Jin Kingdom monarch, Jin Feng. It had been many years. His secret skills of Star Palace could have been used again long ago. However, if it wasn't necessary, he didn't use the technique easily. Then, Universe god Qin Yang took a blood coagulating elixir and wanted to kill him with the aid of the elixir. That triggered his anger. He carried out the secret skills of Star Palace and integrated the power of stars into his sword principle. Then, the power of the retreating eternal light suddenly increased by tenfold. One must know that Jian Wushuang and Universe god Qin Yang were evenly matched. Universe god Qin Yang only increased his power of Crimson Moon by 30% with the aid of the elixir, while Jian Wushuang increased his power by tenfold after he carried out the secret skills of Star Palace. 30% versus tenfold. That was a vast difference. Rumble! The huge, resplendent Crimson Moon collapsed directly. There was no space for a struggle, but it shattered easily like dead wood. While the brilliant eternal light continued to expand and drown the entire body of Universe god Qin Yang. No! Universe god Qin Yang bellowed tragically and vanished into thin air the very next second. Chapter 1307, Omen. Chapter 1307, Omen. Boom! The two appalling powers in the center of the battlefield finally dissipated. Everything in the world finally came back into peace. But the crowd around the battlefield remained in a dead silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Almost everyone stood wide-eyed, filled with horror, and apparently they had not yet recovered from what they had seen. When the crowd saw Qingyang Universe God swallow the scarlet elixir in the final battle, they thought that Jian Wushuang was sure to die. Even Scarlet Island Master intended to give him a hand, though it was too late. However, the situation totally subverted expectation. Unexpectedly, Qingyang Universe God, who enhanced his power by taking advantage of elixirs, was instantly killed by Jian Wushuang. Instantly, without an opportunity to resist. What on earth kinds of tricks does he use? Everyone kept staring at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. Now people had all witnessed how Jian Wushuang killed Qingyang Universe God. They remained wide-eyed in horror while one person became outraged. Jian Wushuang. A roar resounded, full of anger and aggression. At that moment, an aged figure rushed out. This frightening aged figure was apparently stronger than Jian Wushuang and Qingyang Universe God. He rushed toward Jian Wushuang, intending to kill him, but he was held back by another figure. Bastard! The aged figure was the universe god of the 9 oceans. He shouted, bristling with rage. Universe god of the 9 oceans, what the hell are you doing? It was Scarlet Island Master who stopped the universe god of the 9 oceans. The Master, also with a murderous look, could easily suppress the universe god of the 9 oceans with his power. Although universe god of the 9 oceans was one of the 4 masters in the Holy Prefecture, only the most powerful master there, not him, could contain the Scarlet Island Master. Universe god of the 9 oceans, only a primary universe god in the 2nd heaven, meant nothing to Scarlet Island Master. Universe god of the 9 oceans, here is Diu Palace, and the Palace Master is also present. You should know how to behave yourself. White Sector god from Diu Palace also came out to control the situation. Hearing the words, Universe god of 9 oceans changed his attitude and respectfully said to Diu Palace Master in the distance, Your Majesty, my disciple Qingyang was killed by Jian Wushuang. Please help me call for the justice. Justice? The Diu Palace Master glanced at Universe god of 9 oceans and sneered, Don't speak such a bared-faced lie. Universe god of 9 oceans was surprised by the response he received. Humph. Death and injuries are inevitable in such a fierce battle. Moreover, it's your disciple who asked for the battle and even took the elixirs in order to kill Jian Wushuang. So why shouldn't Jian Wushuang kill him? Diu Palace Master said indifferently. The crowd also cast a taunting glance at Universe god of 9 oceans. They witnessed everything and could judge the situation fairly. Qingyang Jieshan shamelessly took the elixirs in the battle in order to kill Jian Wushuang, so it was fair that Jian Wushuang killed him for self-defense. After all, they weren't fools. The face of Universe god of 9 oceans went pale. He knew that he and the Holy Prefecture should accept the facts, even though he was unwilling to do so. Everyone was on the side of Jian Wushuang. And here was Diu Palace, with its master was present. He could do nothing but contain his own anger. Jian Wushuang. Frustrated, he glanced at Jian Wushuang with his indifferent and murderous eyes. But this time he was shocked. As was anyone else who looked at Jian Wushuang. It was because they found that Jian Wushuang completely ignored Universe god of 9 oceans despite the extreme anger and murderous look of the latter. Instead, he was looking up at the heaven above him, with an unprecedentedly serious expression. From the heavens came a low hum, accompanied by an annihilatory power. All the crowd were shocked, with eyes wide open when they saw the scene. That is... This annihilatory power. It is a god test. Exactly, it's a god test. Oh my god. Everyone almost got shocked. It was unbelievable that Jian Wushuang had immediately ushered in his important god test right after he had killed Qingyang Universe god through a hard battle. God test right after a fierce fight? What a coincidence! Even Diu Palace Master and Lord Wu Tsong could hardly believe what they had seen and frowned. Generally speaking, a cultivating practitioner could feel the coming of the god test a long time before its arrival, and he could even predict the exact date because the suggestion was so clear and obvious. But now, the god test of Jian Wushuang came suddenly without a sign. If there had been one, Jian Wushuang would never have chosen to fight with Qingyang Universe god. The heavens kept humming. And the universe suddenly darkened. And in the heavens, large dark clouds gathered, in the depth of which violent forces were brewing. Everyone could feel the horrible pressure of the dark clouds. Suffocating. The pressure. Feeling the pressure, Diu Palace Master and Lord Wu Tsong realized something, and their expression changed again. No, this is not a god test. Diu Palace Master said. You're right. The pressure is accumulating, there is no sign of it coming immediately. Wu Tsong added. These 2 prestigious universe gods from the 3rd heaven looked at each other, saying the same word. Omen. Now even these 2 prominent figures expressed a hint of fear. Indeed, the omen before the coming of the god test. Diu Palace Master took a deep breath and solemnly said, all cultivating practitioners will embrace an omen before the arrival of the god test, which serves as an indicator to practitioners. However, in the eternal chaotic world, the omen came as a feeling to most of the practitioners. But Jian Wushuang's omen formed into thunderclouds. A thundercloud with such a horrible pressure. Chapter 1308, The Descending Test. Chapter 1308, The Descending Test. It isn't God's test but a signifier of a descending test. The signifier formed into thunderclouds. Oh God! Everyone on the training field quickly came back to reality and exclaimed one after another. Most of them had undergone God's test, but they had only received some strange sensation before their God's test came by. However, the signifier of Jian Wushuang's God test had taken the shape of such terrifying thunderclouds. Until his God test descended, how strong would it become? Terrifying. Everyone was terrified. It is said that someone too smart dies young. Those geniuses, the better they are, the more ferocious the God's test that they encounter. Jian Wushuang was extremely gifted and one like him is rare to come by. Hence, the God's test that he would face would definitely be scary, Wu Tsang mumbled to himself in the void. The Jian Wushuang, even God couldn't tolerate with you. Universe God in the 9 oceans laughed hysterically and mischievously. Even the signifier of your God's test has already taken the shape of thunderclouds. I have never heard of that before. When the real God's test comes, it would definitely be earth-shaking. Aren't you extremely talented? Your power as a mere universe master, no one universe God in the first heaven in Dayu world could win against you. As you are so great, I'd like to see how are you going to pass the upcoming God's test. Universe God in the 9 oceans was extremely angry earlier. Universe God Qin Yang died before him after all, but he couldn't do anything. Then he felt much better. From the signs, he could tell Jian Wushuang was going to deal with an extremely terrifying God's test. Dealing with such a terrifying God's test, Jian Wushuang had almost no hope of surviving. On the training field, everyone came back to reality from their astonishment. They fixed their gazes on Jian Wushuang but remained silent. Jian Wushuang was the center of attention, but he didn't look worried. As for the mischievous laugh of Universe God in the 9 oceans, he wasn't concerned about him either. His eyes were fixed on the thundercloud above him. There was a terrifying pressure among the thundercloud. It didn't go away but lingered in the sky for a very long time. From the thunderclouds, Jian Wushuang received a message. 820 years later? Jian Wushuang muttered softly. The sign of God's test had come and it would provide the cultivator a time frame for them to prepare themselves. Although Jian Wushuang was going to undertake inverse cultivation test, it was the same. The time given for him to prepare for the inverse cultivation test was 120 years. It's too short. King of Venomous Worms' voice sounded very depressed in Jian Wushuang's body. In ordinary cultivation, most of them would have a few centuries to prepare for God's test, or even longer. Hence, 120 years was fairly short. It is really not long, but I can at least prepare myself in time. Jian Wushuang clenched his fist. Rumble. The thunder sound continued to be heard, but the thundercloud that lingered above the void for a very long time finally started to disperse, and the terrifying pressure that covered the sky gradually dispersed too. Very soon, everywhere became calm and resumed its original state. Jian Wushuang reined in his gaze. He stood on the ground with his eyebrows tightly creased. He seemed to be muttering to himself. He did that for a while, then he lifted his head. He took a step and stood before the master of Dayu Palace and Wucang. Palace Master, I have a presumptuous request. I wish you would consent, Jian Wushuang spoke politely. Go ahead. The master of Dayu Palace looked Jian Wushuang in the eyes. My God's test will be here in 120 years. The place that I will undergo the God's test, I'd like it to be at Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. I wonder if it's okay, Jian Wushuang asked. Of course, the master of Dayu Palace nodded. Tribunal Passing Pinnacle is a designated place for undergoing God's test. Whoever that passes their God's test there would be beneficial for Dayu Palace. After all, The inner disciples of Diyu Palace can watch by the side to accumulate more experience, especially when a genius like you is undergoing God's test. It's a chance that is hard to come by. Focus on passing the God's test. When you undergo God's test, I'll personally watch over it and there'll definitely be no one who can disturb you. Thank you, Jian Wushuang expressed his gratitude. Regardless of if he was undergoing God's test or the inverse cultivation test, the most important facet in going through God's test was to not be disturbed by external factors. Then, there was deep-seated grudge between him and Holy Prefecture. If he were to undergo God's test in other places, he was worried that the other experts from Holy Prefecture would make trouble when he underwent the God's test. But in Diyu Palace, there was the master of Diyu Palace who would attend personally. Hence, no one would dare to act recklessly. In other words, no one could affect him. Then he could undergo his God's test with his all. One more thing, Jian Wushuang looked at the master of Diyu Palace and continued, the reason why I could improve so tremendously in power in the 1 years is because of the 10 years accumulation from the Little Scattered Stars game. If possible, I'd like another chance to resolve the chess game. If there's any condition or price that I have to pay, you can be straightforward with me and I'll try my best to fulfill. Jian Wushuang said in all sincerity. If it was before, he wouldn't have had the nerve to request a chance even if he was willing to pay a price. However, inverse cultivation test was coming and Jian Wushuang felt the increase of pressure. At such a crucial moment, he would like to improve his power as much as possible. The Little Scattered Stars game was really helpful for him. He, of course, wanted to obtain it with his all. Hearing what Jian Wushuang said, the master of Diyu Palace smiled faintly and said, although the Little Scattered Stars game is in my hand and Wu Cong would study it with me occasionally, it isn't much help to the two of us. It doesn't matter if we lend it to you for 120 years. You are my guest. You can use the resources in Diyu Palace as you wish. Diyu Palace has treasure and elixir that could assist you in passing God's test. Of course, you have to use treasure of the same value in exchange for the treasure. Besides, the blaze quicksand gourd that I borrowed from you earlier, I'd return it to you before you undergo your God's test too. Thank you, Palace Master. Jian Wushuang thanked him again. The master of Diyu Palace waved. Jian Wushuang. There was suddenly a deep voice and the owner of the voice was Wu Cong who was seated next to the master of Diyu Palace. Lord Wu Cong, Jian Wushuang immediately looked over. You are extremely gifted. I have come across many geniuses from wandering around Snow Kingdom over the years, but there is hardly anyone who could compare favorably with you. I hope you will pass the God's test. Wu Cong looked at Jian Wushuang as he announced. If you were to pass through the God's test, I will pass you a token and recommend you into Snow Dojo. There are countless geniuses and Diyu World is beyond compare. When you're there, your potential could be put to full play. Chapter 1309, Defense Secret Skills. Chapter 1309, Defense Secret Skills. Snow Dojo. Jian Wushuang was quite interested. He had heard of this place, knowing that it was a camp for the geniuses of Snow Kingdom in which there were far more geniuses than Diyu Universe. The Snow Kingdom is quite large, and Snow Dojo is also a good place for you now, though it isn't as good as the Lineage of Stars. The King of Venomous Worms said in Jian Wushuang's heart. I know, but I should consider it after I finish my inverse cultivation test. Jian Wushuang said solemnly. And soon he left. And the people also left. And the battle came to an end. Jian Wushuang defeated and killed Qingyang Universe God, which was unexpected by the crowd at the beginning. However, the topic that people talked about after the battle was not that Qingyang Universe God was killed by Jian Wushuang, but that Jian Wushuang would go through his God test in 120 years. Everyone was very curious about how powerful the God test could be with such an astonishing omen. Could Jian Wushuang pass his God test in 120 years? Jian Wushuang sat alone in the secret room, with the Little Scattered Stars game in his front. The King of Venomous Worms, within the body of Jian Wushuang, said to him, the inverse cultivation test is the same as God test, in which defense abilities and life-saving skills are even more important than the swordsmanship itself. So in the next 120 years you should seek to improve different abilities rather than only polishing your swordsmanship. I know. Jian Wushuang nodded. Before focusing on the little scattered stars game, I will first improve my defense ability and life-saving skills. And the first step to develop defense ability is to cultivate defense secret skills. Actually, Jian Wushuang had cultivated a kind of defense secret skill. That was the golden secret skill from Green Fire Palace. Green Fire Palace, serving as a huge battlefield and a large treasure deposit, owned many secret skills with high levels, including the gold secret skill, which was enough for universe gods in the first heaven and the second heaven. The gold secret skill was divided into 3 parts. Only cultivating practitioners above Tianzuan were qualified to practice the first part. As for the second part, only universe gods in the first heaven were qualified. Jian Wushuang had only finished the first part. Now, in order to improve his defense ability of the body, it was imperative for him to practice the second part. Actually, I have tried to cultivate the second part for several times but failed. Now, although I have developed my overall strength a lot, my magical power hasn't improved enough. I think it would be quite difficult for me to achieve that goal. Yep, quite difficult for you currently, but if you can get some natural treasures and a sacred bone elixir, and then combine them with your magic power, you can probably finish the second part, said the king of venomous worms. Sacred bone elixir? Jian Wushuang was confused. That is a kind of elixir that forcibly enhances the magic power in a short time. If used properly, it can help you cultivate the second part of the gold secret skills. The king of venomous worms smiled. As the guest of Dayu Palace, why not use the resources here? You can ask members of the palace for sacred bone elixirs or ask them to find some for you if there aren't here. Precious as it is, the elixir isn't difficult to find in such a big and powerful Dayu Palace. Well, let me ask them right now. Jian Wushuang immediately sent a message to White Sector God. And White Sector God replied soon. There were more than 1 sacred bone elixirs right here in the palace. White Sector God immediately asked his subordinates to send 2 sacred bone elixirs to Jian Wushuang, who also paid numerous chaotic crystals. With sacred bone elixirs in hand, Jian Wushuang started to cultivate the gold secret skill under the guidance of the king of venomous worms. The cultivation took 3 years. After 3 years, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes in the secret room, with his body shaking and producing a cracking sound. Done! Jian Wushuang was extremely excited. With the help of sacred bone elixirs and the guidance of the king of venomous worms, Jian Wushuang spent 3 years completing the second part of the gold secret skill. Thanks to the cultivation, Jian Wushuang's already incomparable magic power soared again and reached a new level. I feel that my current magic power is at least 10 times stronger than before, Jian Wushuang said. His former power was equal to an ordinary universe god in the first heaven, and now he was powerful enough to easily match a peak universe god in the first heaven. It was incredible for a universe god to make such achievements. What's more, the most powerful skills that Jian Wushuang had was not magic power but the blood-killing plate armor. The blood-killing plate armor shared a great reputation in the eternal chaotic world, because it could weaken the power of a universe god by 90%. With the blood-killing plate armor, plus his soaring magic power as well as his defense ability, Jian Wushuang was definitely able to compete with average universe gods in the second heaven. However, what Jian Wushuang was facing was the inverse cultivation test. The most terrible god test in the eternal chaotic world. Jian Wushuang believed that his current defense ability was not yet enough for him to get through the test. So he went to the treasure deposit of Dayu Palace. He wanted to pick a suitable defense treasure, just like the black turtle shell that Dong Men universe god had used in his god test. The black turtle shell was a very powerful defense treasure, which Dong Men universe god relied on to resist the second sacred thunder. Unfortunately, that thunder also carried a trace of fire test, which resulted in his death. To avoid the same situation and get through the inverse cultivation test, Jian Wushuang should make full preparation. And a suitable defense treasure could help him improve the success possibility. Finally, Jian Wushuang decided to choose a treasure called Green Bell. Ordinary as it was, the green bell was more powerful than the black turtle. In order to get the bell, Jian Wushuang paid a lot. Chapter 1310 Lineage of Scarlet. Chapter 1310 Lineage of Scarlet. In the dark green bell, there were two secret skills. First, Immovable Mountain, which was used as a defense. The other one was used for suppression. However, the Blood Mountain sword possessed suppression power. Hence, the secret skill of suppression wasn't much help to Jian Wushuang. After Jian Wushuang obtained the dark green bell, he stayed in the secret room to study the defense secret skill. Just as he mastered the defense secret skill, he received a message from the master of Scarlet Island. Jian Wushuang quickly returned to Scarlet Island. The master of Scarlet Island only told him to make a trip back to the island, but he didn't mention what happened. I am going all out to prepare for the upcoming inverse cultivation test, and the island master surely knows this too. If it wasn't about anything important, he definitely wouldn't bother me. Jian Wushuang was very certain about it. The master of Scarlet Island knew, and he still called for him, so it must be urgent. Jian Wushuang didn't delay but immediately left to go back to the Scarlet Island. Jian Wushuang arrived at Scarlet Island very quickly and met the master of Scarlet Island. In the lofty palace, there was another person besides Jian Wushuang and the master of Scarlet Island. He was a skinny elderly with white eyebrows. The elderly with white eyebrows had very long brows that were almost reaching his ear lobes. Jian Wushuang, let me introduce you. This is Master Uncle Tianing, the master of Scarlet Island introduced. Master Uncle? Jian Wushuang stunned. He once obtained the most detailed information about Scarlet Island, but it had never been brought up that there was a Master Uncle of the Island Master. The aura of the Master Uncle was extremely tough, not any weaker as compared to the Master of Scarlet Island. He obviously was a peak universe god in the second heaven as well. However, Jian Wushuang had never heard the name Tian before this. It seems that the master of Scarlet Island ain't as simple as he looks, Jian Wushuang complimented. However, it is only right and proper. He has been an overlord in Dayu world for so many years, how could he be as simple as he looks? Jian Wushuang thought and bowed before the elderly with white eyebrows for the first time. Universe god Tianing, greetings from Jian Wushuang. The elderly with white eyebrows waved. I cultivate in seclusion all year round, and I had no idea that a prodigy like you had appeared in Scarlet Island. Universe god Tianing looked at Jian Wushuang with admiration. He had been in seclusion all the time. He only received the message from the master of Scarlet Island not long ago and found out about the existence of Jian Wushuang. He had also heard of Jian Wushuang's achievements. A universe master killed the strongest genius of Dayu world, universe god Qin Yang, who stood high above all universe gods in the first heaven. The achievement was simply astonishing. Judging merely on the signs of the upcoming god's test, which had taken the shape of pressuring thunderclouds, that sight itself was unbelievable. Both incidents clearly showed that Jian Wushuang was a monster through and through. Jian Wushuang, I called you here today for just one matter, the master of Scarlet Island said. Jian Wushuang looked at the master of Scarlet Island. While the master of Scarlet Island exchanged a look with universe god Tianing next to him and smiled, I've discussed in detail with Master Uncle. We finally came to a decision for you to join the lineage of Scarlet. Lineage of Scarlet? Jian Wushuang stunned. He only knew about Scarlet Island, but what was the lineage of Scarlet? The master of Scarlet Island wasn't surprised when he saw Jian Wushuang in confusion. He explained, Jian Wushuang, you might not know that the core of the Scarlet Island is actually the lineage of Scarlet. However, there are not many experts in the lineage of Scarlet in Scarlet Island. For instance, the real lineage of Scarlet in the Scarlet Island are in fact now only Master Uncle and I. Is that so? Jian Wushuang was convinced. The master of Scarlet Island continued, Scarletion is founded by an expert above all the universe gods. He was once outstanding, but he declined later on. Until now, he has only existed in Dayu world. The lineage of Scarlet has been passed down until now, and there is an extraordinary secret skill. It's called Scarlet Kingdom. Scarlet Kingdom? Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted. He immediately recalled a message that he had once read. The three overlords in Dayu World, including Scarlet Island, Golden Sun Sect, and Holy Prefecture, although they were roughly the same in power, the strongest among the three overlords was definitely the master of Scarlet Island. As for the master of Golden Sun Sect and Holy Prefecture, although they were peak universe gods in the second heaven, they were one notch below the master of Scarlet Island in power. The reason was because the master of Scarlet Island gained fame through Scarlet Kingdom. That technique was a very ferocious secret skill. For the technique to be put to full play by a peak universe god in the second heaven like the master of Scarlet Island, it was even scarier. Jian Wushuang, do you want to cultivate the Scarlet Kingdom? The master of Scarlet Island looked at Jian Wushuang. Cultivate the Scarlet Kingdom? Jian Wushuang stared. The Scarlet Kingdom was the technique that made the master of Scarlet Island infamous. It was extremely fierce. He, of course, would love to cultivate such a secret skill. But why would the master of Scarlet Island pass on the secret skill to him so easily? Jian Wushuang, you are extremely gifted. If you were to pass the God's test, you would definitely have a bright future. However, the God's test isn't ordinary. There's a limit to how much I can help. The only thing that I could help you with, I reckon, would be the secret skill, Scarlet Kingdom, the master of Scarlet Island explained. However, Scarlet Kingdom is lineage of Scarlet's most important secret skill after all. Only members of the lineage of Scarlet are qualified to cultivate the skill. I've discussed with Master Uncle. If you were to agree to join us as a lineage of Scarlet, I can lead you to cultivate this secret skill. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands together. Even though he was tempted, Jian Wushuang replied honestly, Island Master, to be frank, I will leave Dayu World for Snow Dojo after passing the God's test. Or maybe I will wander in other vast places. Hence, even if I become lineage of Scarlet, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to contribute much to the lineage of Scarlet. The master of Scarlet Island and universe god Tian Ying smiled when they heard his reply. The master of Scarlet Island replied, Jian Wushuang, don't you worry, we lineage of Scarlet do not restrain experts under our command. If you were to become lineage of Scarlet, you could still do whatever that you wish. Even if you are away all year round, it wouldn't be a problem. In the lineage of Scarlet's history, there were a few who were the island masters before me, who wandered on their own for years after they found a suitable successor. But there's only one condition. If the lineage of Scarlet were to be in a life and death situation one day, I will signal an SOS and I hope you will be able to come back in time to provide assistance. Chapter 13:11 Interpreting. Chapter 13:11 Interpreting. No restrictions except having to come back to save Scarlet Island once a crisis happens. Without much hesitation, Jian Wushuang nodded, yes. The only condition was absolutely acceptable to him. Even if he did not join the lineage of Scarlet, he would definitely offer a hand whenever the island met with a crisis. After all, it was the first place that welcomed him after he entered the eternal chaotic world, and the island master was very kind to him. That's the deal. Scarlet Island Master smiled. Tian Ying Universe God who was near the master took out a command token to give to Jian Wushuang. Drip a drop of blood to it and you will become a member of the lineage of Scarlet. Jian Wushuang glanced at the command token with his soul power, nodded, and dripped a drop of blood into it. Scarlet Island Master smiled, welcome. From now on, just call me Brother He Yuan, as we are both from lineage of Scarlet. Brother He Yuan? Hearing the real name of Scarlet Island Master for the first time, Jian Wushuang felt a little bit awkward. Now, I will take you to the cultivating place of Scarlet Kingdom. Scarlet Island Master took Jian Wushuang to the core place of the lineage of Scarlet. The place was over 10,000 miles below the Scarlet City. Right in this place sat a tremendous palace, hidden by an advanced forbidden token. Ordinary gods, including universe gods in the third heaven, could not find it. Jian Wushuang followed Scarlet Island Master and Tian in Universe God, and came to a wide square in the palace. In the middle of the square, there was a stone monument with ancient words written on it. Each of these words was magical and grand. The stone monument was left by the founder of our lineage of Scarlet. The powerful descendants all depend on them to interpret the secret skills of Scarlet Kingdom. Scarlet Island Master said. Jian Wushuang looked at the stone monument in front of him, feeling amazed. He knew how extraordinary it was. The material, for example, was unknown by Jian Wushuang. Interesting. The king of venomous worms in the body of Jian Wushuang said, "This stone monument is made up of ancient magic crystals, which are precious in the eternal chaotic world. Such a huge piece of ancient magic crystal must be invaluable. And the founder of Lineage of Scarlet used it just to record the secret skills. It is too luxurious even though the lineage is powerful. It feels like the founder of the Lineage of Scarlet had very extraordinary power." On what level? Jian Wushuang asked. I can't tell from just an ancient magic crystal monument. But no matter how powerful it was, the founder lagged far behind the founder of the Lineage of Stars. The king of venomous worms said. Doubtless. Jian Wushuang replied. After all, the Lineage of Stars was among the top ones in the 10 cultivation sanctuaries. If the founder of the Lineage of Scarlet had been powerful enough to be compared with the founder of the Lineage of Stars, the Lineage of Scarlet wouldn't only stay in a small universe like this. The secret skills of the Scarlet Kingdom are divided into 4 parts. Even the simplest part is very difficult to interpret. I spent 3,000 years in front of the monument to figure out the first part, and I still can't interpret the second one. You are more talented than me, but your time is limited. So you should seize the time and try to interpret the first part. It is enough to finish the first part. As for the next 3 parts, you can work on finishing them until you pass your God test. Scarlet Island Master said. Okay. Jian Wushuang nodded. Then we will leave you alone to stay here to interpret. Remember to keep track of the time. Scarlet Island Master reminded Jian Wushuang again and left with Tian Jie Universe God. After they left, Jian Wushuang immediately sat down. His soul power instantly covered the entire monument, and he could clearly see what was hidden within the monument. Then he began to meticulously interpret it. After only 3 days, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes. What happened? Jian Wushuang frowned. Why did I spend just 3 days to interpret the first part while Brother Hiyuan used 3,000 years? Jian Wushuang was confused. When he heard about what Scarlet Island Master said, he felt that it was not easy to interpret the secret skill of Scarlet Kingdom. But unexpectedly, he just took 3 days. With another 2 days, he could even interpret all the 4 parts of the skills. How come? Jian Wushuang was still puzzled. At this time, the king of venomous worms gave him an answer. Scarlet Island Master said it was difficult based on his own intelligence and capability. First of all, he is far less intelligent to you. More importantly, it is because you have ignited the soul fire. This stone is made of ancient magic crystal, which makes obstacles in people's consciousness. Therefore, people covering this monument with consciousness find it hard to see all the hidden things. I guess the founder of the Lineage of Stars deliberately set this obstacle in order to test the intelligence of his descendants. Although you don't have enough magic power, you are doing inverse cultivation and you have ignited the soul fire, which covers this monument and offsets the obstacles for you. So it is much easier for you to interpret. In this way, you easily outpaced Scarlet Island Master. Jian Wushuang fully understood and felt amazed by his power. The powerful inverse cultivation facilitated the soul power and ignited the soul fire, contributing to incomparable advantages for Jian Wushuang. The next 3 secret skills won't take long for me to finish, I think. Jian Wushuang smiled and then continued to interpret. Chapter 1312 Scarlet Kingdom. Chapter 1312 Scarlet Kingdom. Jian Wushuang understood the first level of Scarlet Kingdom in 3 days. Although the following second, third and fourth levels of the secret skill were more difficult than the first, Jian Wushuang found it rather easy to understand. A year passed by very quickly. Before the steel, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and a bright light swept out. Vroom! A terrifying crimson flame surged and formed a huge scarlet sea fire which filled the universe. Jian Wushuang was right in the core of the scarlet sea fire. The surrounding crimson flame that filled the air was submitted to him and he became the ruler of the scarlet sea fire. Such a strong power. This is Scarlet Kingdom. It feels rather similar to realm techniques. Jian Wushuang looked around in astonishment. However, Scarlet Kingdom was different from realm techniques after all. Realm techniques were a great technique to suppress opponents and weaken their power. But Scarlet Kingdom wouldn't pressure the opponent. Even when the opponent was right in the core of sea fire, he wouldn't be affected much. However, Jian Wushuang, who was in the sea fire, would be able to perform stronger swordsmanship. Among the scarlet sea fire that filled the air, Jian Wushuang stood up and the Blood Mountain sword was already in his hands. Jian Wushuang wielded the sword and there was immediately a bolt of lightning, an explosion of terrifying power, and there was immediately a twisted black hole in the scarlet sea fire. The power, Jian Wushuang was beaming with joy. He could clearly sense the tremendous increment of his power in swordsmanship. The increment was about 70% more. 70% was already quite significant. No wonder, even though the Master of Golden Sun Sect and Holy Prefecture are both universe gods in the second heaven, but they couldn't win against the Master of Scarlet Island. It is because the Master of Scarlet Island possesses the secret skill of Scarlet Kingdom, and the moment he carries out the secret skill, his overall power would increase by 70% straightway. And merely the first level could be so strong. The following second, third and fourth would only be stronger. Jian Wushuang gasped with admiration. Of course, although he understood all four levels of the secret skill, he could only really perform the first level of the secret skill. As for the second level of Scarlet Kingdom, maybe he could only be qualified to perform it after he become a universe god when he passed the inverse cultivation test. With Scarlet Kingdom, my overall power increased tremendously again. I am even more confident to pass the inverse cultivation test. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands tightly together. After he understood all four levels of the secret skill, he didn't continue to stay but got up to leave. When he arrived outside the cave dwelling, Jian Wushuang saw the Master of Scarlet Island and Universe God Tian Ying that were waiting outside. Sorry to keep you waiting, Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang? The Master of Scarlet Island and Universe God Tian Ying were both shocked to see Jian Wushuang. You came out so quickly? How long has it been? From what the Master of Scarlet Island and Universe God Tian Ying said, even though Jian Wushuang was extremely gifted, it would require at least 10 years' time to understand the first level of Scarlet Kingdom. But it had only been a year. You have mastered the first level secret skill? The Master of Scarlet Island asked in disbelief. Yes, Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Not only have I understood the first level, but I've also understood the latter 3 levels too. 4 levels of secret skill, you understood them all. The Master of Scarlet Island and Universe God Tian Ying stared. Understood all 4 levels of secret skill in 1 year? How is it possible? The Master of Scarlet Island was astonished. One must know that he himself had spent almost 3,000 years on only understanding the first level of secret skill, and he had yet to understand the second level of secret skill until then. Jian Wushuang understood all 4 levels of secret skill in 1 year. Merely a year. We were all human, why are we so different? Monster! The Master of Scarlet Island and Universe God Tian Ying looked at each other in surprise and could only describe Jian Wushuang with that particular word. Jian Wushuang, the most impressive thing about the Scatletion was the secret skill, Scarlet Kingdom. It is also the only thing that we could help you with. The rest of the things depend on yourself, the Master of Scarlet Island said. Jian Wushuang nodded heavily. He was very clear that understanding Scarlet Kingdom really did increase his power quite a bit. But even with the secret skill, he still couldn't undergo the inverse cultivation test with no worries. He still had to get ready. He still had to continue to increase his power. He focused on increasing his level of swordsmanship. Jian Wushuang returned to where he had stayed in Dayu Palace. In the secret room, the little scattered stars game was before Jian Wushuang, and he started studying and resolving it again. He resolved 35 moves the previous time, and then he continued to resolve the chess game from 36th move onwards. Then, he obviously had more time compared to the previous time. V-Room. The scene fast-forwarded. Again, there was a boundless land covered in white. At the far front of the land, there was a figure in a white robe standing there. The moment Jian Wushuang saw the white robe, the figure withdrew his long sword and charged towards Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang couldn't feel the existence of any sword principle, but he could merely depend on his understanding towards nature of swordsmanship to resolve the problem before him. While Jian Wushuang was resolving it, he continued to accumulate experience like before. He immersed himself in resolving the little scattered stars game. As time flew past, the little scattered stars game was extremely profound, and every 33 steps marked a threshold. Under normal situation, a universe god in the first heaven of a top genius level could spend 10 years and resolve the 33rd move. However, every move after that represented a level higher. In a 20-year time period, one might not even resolve the 40th move, and in 100 years, one might only be wandering around over 40 moves. Jian Wushuang started resolving from the 36th move, and he spent 100 years on the chess set. After 100 years, the 51st black chess gradually disappeared from the little scattered stars game before Jian Wushuang. The 51st move was resolved. Until then, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes. The 51st move is finally resolved, Jian Wushuang sighed. In 100 years, from the 35th move to the 51st move, I only resolved 16 moves? Jian Wushuang wasn't pleased with the outcome. However, King of Venomous Worms who was in his body spoke. Jian Wushuang, you think the little scattered stars game is easy? Don't forget that to you, just a universe master, this is too high of a level. To be able to resolve the 51st move in 100 years' time, it's incredibly good. How dare you dream for more? True that, Jian Wushuang smiled, it's nearer to my inverse cultivation test. There is only a decade left. I have to make use of the last decade wisely. Chapter 13:13, Everything is Ready. Chapter 13:13, Everything is Ready. In the last 10 years before the God test, Jian Wushuang kept cultivating in the secret room. He had kept trying to understand the swordsmanship that he had learnt from the little scattered stars game. His swordsmanship had also reached a new height. And the God test was approaching. Time passed quickly, and there were only 10 days left. The last 10 days. Jian Wushuang was sitting in the secret room quietly, breathing slowly. The closer the God test was, the more peaceful he was. In the past 120 years, I have already improved myself as needed, and made all necessary preparations. Everything is ready. Jian Wushuang held his hands tightly. In the past 120 years, he had cultivated the second part of the gold secret skills to dramatically improve his magic power. Then he got the green bell, through which he mastered the mountain stillness secret skill to greatly enhance his body defensibility. Then he interpreted the first part of the Scarlet Kingdom secret skills, which further improved his overall power. Finally, there was his swordsmanship. He figured out a way to do the little scattered stars game using 100 years, and spent more than 10 years to understand what he learnt, so that his swordsmanship also skyrocketed. In a word, he had done his best to raise his abilities in all aspects. Now he was in the best condition in his current level. Whether he could survive the God test all depended on his luck now. It's time to go. Jian Wushuang slowly stood up, took a breath, and then went to the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle. He arrived at the top of the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle 10 days before the God test and sat there to wait. As soon as he sat down, the heavens started rumbling. the universe changed its color and a large block of thunderclouds began to gather. King of Venomous Worms sighed. There are still 10 days left before the god test, but the thunderclouds have already begun to gather and accumulate power. Jian Wushuang could feel what was happening, but he did not care. Instead, he closed his eyes and tried to make his heart empty and peaceful. After Jian Wushuang's arrival, Dayu Palace began bustling. Many talents and disciples from Dayu Palace all rushed to the tribulation passing pinnacle. They just stood 10,000 miles away from the pinnacle and watched Jian Wushuang in the distance. Of course, they were also aware of the thunderclouds that were gathering. Why are the thunderclouds gathering so early? Indeed, too early. Ordinary practitioners usually see thunderclouds gather an hour before the god test. But I guess Jian Wushuang's god test will still be a few days later. 10 days exactly. The talents that had arrived were having a heated discussion. They couldn't believe what was happening. On the day when the omen came, Jian Wushuang could accurately feel that the god test would come 120 years later. In another word, there was exactly 10 days left. Powerful gods in Scarlet Island, Gold Sun Sect and Holy Prefecture also came here one after another. Jian Wushuang. I have done my best to help you. Whether you can get through the god test now all depends on you. Scarlet started at Jian Wushuang and said to him. Beside him, there were more than a dozen universe gods from Scarlet Islands, including the universe god. More than half of the universe gods from Scarlet Island had made acquaintances with Jian Wushuang in Dayu Palace. All of them came here to see him except Tian Ing Universe God, who couldn't show up due to his special identity. The god test will come in 10 days, but the thunderclouds have already been gathering. The universe gods looked worried. Next to the group from the Scarlet Island was the Holy Prefecture. More than 10 universe gods came here too, led by Universe God in the 9 Oceans. Universe God in the 9 Oceans watched Jian Wushuang with a murderous expression. Jian Wushuang, you are now the recognized genius in Dayu Universe, and even Qingyang was defeated by you. But the more powerful you are, the more dangerous the god test will be. Nothing but thunderclouds have gathered for an entire 10 days. I guess you are doomed to die in the god test. Universe God in the 9 Oceans was excited about that. He was eager to see Jian Wushuang die in the god test. It was because he wouldn't have to make so much efforts to take revenge of Jian Wushuang. Gold Sun Sect Master also hoped Jian Wushuang to die. He was aware of the genius of Jian Wushuang after witnessing how Qingyang Universe God was killed in the battle with Jian Wushuang. But this time, Jian Wushuang won't be so lucky. He also looked grim. In the heaven near the tribulation passing pinnacle stood Dayu Palace Master and Lord Wuzong. Dayu Palace Master had already banned anyone from disturbing Jian Wushuang, and anyone who disobeyed would be killed. No one dared to violate the rule under the authority of Dayu Palace Master. And at that moment, 2 universe gods from the 3rd heaven were also looking at the thunderclouds. The thunderclouds formed as early as when the omen came. And now they start to accumulate power 10 days before the god test and will continue for entire 10 days. How powerful it is! During my countless years in Snow Kingdom, I have seen countless talents going through the god test. The highest record of thundercloud gathering I know was only 2 days. But in Jian Wushuang's case, 10 days. They had had rich experiences and witnessed a lot of cases. But what was happening was astonishing to them. From the 10 days gathering clouds, they could see how crazy and horrible the coming god test would be. In the heaven, endless thunderclouds gathered, with increasing power and pressure. 10 days soon passed by. Chapter 13-14, The Arrival of Inverse Cultivation Test and the First Divine Thunder. Chapter 13-14. The Arrival of Inverse Cultivation Test and the First Divine Thunder. Jian Wushuang sat on the peak of the tribunal passing pinnacle with his eyes closed, just like an old monk in deep meditation. In the surroundings of the tribunal passing pinnacle, if it could have been described as noisy when the experts were in discussion among themselves earlier, then it was now dead silent. Dead silent. There were no other noises. The reason wasn't that the experts didn't want to talk among themselves, but because they were astonished by the thundercloud gathered in the void above. 10 days, a total of 10 days. The thundercloud in the void above continuously gathered and were constantly saving more power. The thundercloud only covered the tribunal passing pinnacle at the beginning, but it then expanded to a range of a few 100,000 miles. The experts who were waiting around the tribunal passing pinnacle retreated to a few 100,000 miles away as they were afraid that they might be within range of the terrifying God's test. The most crucial part was that the pressure from the thundercloud constantly turned stronger as the thunderclouds continued to expand. In the 10 days, the pressure from the thundercloud had reached an unbelievable level. The power was too strong. Even though they were out of the coverage of the thunderclouds, even though the pressure wasn't aimed at them, it still scared the wits out of the experts at the scene and made their hairs stand on end. Their eyes were wide open in terror and they couldn't even utter a word. Too powerful. Even the two universe gods in the third heaven, Master of Dayu Palace and Wutsong, were both in an unprecedented state of horror. Wutsong, when you undergo the third god's test, was the pressure given out from the thundercloud this powerful? The Master of Dayu Palace asked. No, Wutsong shook his head. How about you? My third god's test was a fire test and it was known to be terrifying, but I feel that it couldn't be compared to the power of Jian Wushuang's god's test in the first heaven, the Master of Dayu Palace said. Then, the Master of Dayu Palace and Wushuang gasped simultaneously. God's test was supposed to be more and more powerful. As for the God's test in the third heaven, supposedly the last God's test, it should be ridiculously powerful. However, they felt that the pressure spread from the thundercloud when they underwent their God's test in the third heaven couldn't match with Jian Wushuang's God test in the first heaven. What's going on? Just then, rumble. In the middle of the huge thundercloud that covered a range of 100,000 miles, there was a fierce roar suddenly. The thunder roared and shocked all the experts gathered around tribunal passing pinnacle. It's going to start. Everyone held their breath and looked towards tribunal passing pinnacle. On the peak of the tribunal passing pinnacle, Jian Wushuang, who had been sitting in peace as though he was in complete isolation, finally opened his eyes. Is it coming? Jian Wushuang lifted his head and looked at the sky. Even though the pressure from the thundercloud was terrifying, he was extremely calm on the inside. Jian Wushuang, a low voice was heard, I have been living off you for a few thousand years. In the few thousand years, I could give you advice and assist you whenever you come across any danger or trouble. However, you have to depend on yourself this time. Jian Wushuang nodded faintly, go ahead. Jian Wushuang waved and a red stream flowed. Jian Wushuang could only undergo the inverse cultivation test on his own. If he failed to, he would definitely vanish into thin air. If King of Venomous Worms were to stay in his body, he would definitely be involved. Hence, he had to leave. King of Venomous Worms, if I were to die in the inverse cultivation test, please head back to the eternal chaotic world on your own and look for a new ancient god. If you can't find any ancient gods in a short time, you can opt to return to the Green Fire world and back to Star Foggy Sea. You can at least stay alive until the new ancient god descends, Jian Wushuang said. I know. King of Venomous Worms looked into Jian Wushuang's eyes and said solemnly, Jian Wushuang, don't give up even when you reach the last critical moment. You must pass the test. Then, King of Venomous Worms dug downwards and disappeared very quickly. After Jian Wushuang heard that, he smiled and lifted his head again. Inverse cultivation test. It's the scariest god's test in eternal chaotic world. Besides, I am a 4-star imperial ancient god at the highest level. After I pass through this test, it'll be followed by the ancient god's test straight away. God thought too highly of me. However, no one can take my life as they wish. Even if he's a god. Inverse cultivation test, ancient god test. Come on. Jian Wushuang had light spurting out from his eyes and his body suddenly grew into a 3-meter-tall bronze ancient god. In the middle of his eyebrows, there was an upside-down 4-star where surging power flowed out ferociously. Roar! Jian Wushuang bellowed and it shook the earth. In the middle of the thundercloud which covered tens of thousands of miles above him, it seemed to receive Jian Wushuang's provocation. The terrifying thundercloud raged. The universe roared. Rumble. The loud rumble was from the core of the thundercloud, right in the middle of the boundless power. There was a bolt of purplish gold lightning which was as thick as a pail that struck through the thundercloud and descended to the earth. The moment the lightning appeared, there was a terrifying power that seemed as though it could destroy the earth spreading across. The moment the experts gathered around Tribunal Passing Pinnacle saw the purplish gold lightning, they were paralyzed with fear. Purplish gold? Some inner disciples of the Dayu Palace couldn't help but let out an exclamation. In God's test, the most commonly seen was Thunder Test. The purplish gold lightning obviously belonged to Thunder Test. However, there were different levels in Thunder Test too. For instance, when Universe God Dong Men underwent the God Test in the second heaven, his second divine lightning was gilded. Then, the divine thunder that Jian Wushuang was dealing with was in purplish gold. The purplish gold lightning was much stronger compared to the gilded lightning back then. On the peak of Tribunal Passing Pinnacle, Jian Wushuang, who had already become a bronze ancient god, stared at the purplish gold lightning that was above him, and there was madness in his eyes. Purplish gold divine lightning. A divine lightning of such level isn't even worth it for me to take defense. Jian Wushuang let out a bellow and he waved to take off his blood-killing plate armor. He stripped his upper body naked and exposed his ancient god body on the peak. He stared at the purplish gold lightning as it descended, but he didn't look like he was going to block the strike at all. He wanted to resist the terrifying purplish gold lightning with his divine body directly. Chapter 13:15 Fought hard against three sacred thunders. Chapter 13:15 Fought hard against three sacred thunders. What Jian Wushuang did on the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle astonished everyone. What the hell is he doing? Why did he take off his sergeant's armor when the God Test came? He doesn't even have an intention of warding off the sacred thunder. Did he give up resisting and is waiting to die? Is he going to die? At this moment, the heavens were roaring continuously. Everyone witnessed that the purple gold sacred thunder directly struck the body of Jian Wushuang without weakening at all. Bang! A deafening noise broke out. Even universe gods in the second heaven expressed their surprise about the annihilatory power. Obviously, they were amazed about how powerful the purple gold thunder was. Everyone was fully concentrating on what was happening on the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle. After the purple gold thunder disappeared, Jian Wushuang, a 3-meter-tall ancient god, still stood there and held his hands tightly, with the force of the purple gold thunder covering his body. And suddenly he raised his head. Humph! Jian Wushuang violently shook his body. The force of the purple gold thunder dispersed instantly and his bones produced a cracking sound. Great! Jian Wushuang felt excited. He rumbled with a sound loud enough to shake the whole universe. Talent out of the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Jian Wushuang. He is still safe and sound? How come? Impossible! He hasn't got any injuries after being stuck by the scared thunder? Even his breath remains the same, or has become powerful? All bystanders were speechless. Among them, a universe god from the second heaven cried out, "If I were him, I would have to do whatever I could to resist such a huge thunder." But he just resisted it only with the power in his body? In the distant heaven afar, Dayu Palace Master and Lord Wu Tsang looked at each other, feeling amazed. Resist the thunder with his own body power. How brave he is! Dayu Palace said. Actually, there had been similar cases in the eternal chaotic world, but they were few. After all, no one wanted to risk dying with his body totally destroyed. But today, they saw Jian Wushuang successfully resist the thunder test with his own body power. It is just the start of the test. Dayu Palace Master murmured. Lord Wu Tsang also raised his head and looked at heaven. Other bystanders also stopped talking. Normally, Cultivators only had to go through one sacred thunder in the first part of their god test. But obviously, the god test of Jian Wushuang was far more difficult than that. After the first sacred thunder, the thundercloud did not dissipate, but quickly began to form the second thunder. At this time, Jian Wushuang stood at the tribulation passing pinnacle and stared at the heaven, with his blood violently boiling and his hands filled with electricity. After a while, the second sacred thunder shot from the center of the thundercloud. With the same purple-gold color, the second sacred thunder was twice as large as the first one. Boom! The second purple-gold sacred thunder, which contained far more annihilatory power than the first one, shot to Jian Wushuang all of a sudden. Under unimaginable pressure, Jian Wushuang still left the blood-killing plate armor aside and stood there without any intention to use defense. He only used his own body power to resist the second thunder. Doesn't he need defense yet? The second thunder is much more powerful. This crazy man. Those watching Jian Wushuang couldn't help crying out. Under the gaze of all, the second thunder struck Jian Wushuang, who still took no defense at all. Bang! A horrible power broke out from the thunder, strongly hitting the tribulation passing pinnacle, which then sunk and formed into the endless hole. In that hole, the earth was severely burnt and barren. Right at the bottom of the hole, a figure, still strong and powerful, resiliently stood all the torture. Although parts of his body were bleeding or burnt, or even mutilated, he still stood firmly and his breath and power didn't weaken but even strengthened. He stepped out of the huge hole, and at the same time, his mutilated skin all recovered at an incredibly fast rate. Without the help of King of Venomous Worms, Jian Wushuang could still recover himself within a short time. He hasn't. Despite more efforts and injuries as well, he finally resisted the second thunder. Genius! Those bystanders were all impressed by Jian Wushuang. And now, at the center of the vast thundercloud, the third sacred thunder was forming. Boom! The third sacred thunder was shot out with a deafening bang that was able to shake the universe. The same color, but the size was 10 times larger than the last one. The annihilatory power, 10 times larger. Seeing that the third sacred thunder had come, Jian Wushuang got alert. The first sacred thunder caused no trouble for me, but the second one almost reached the highest threshold level that I can bear. And the third one may kill me if I still use nothing for defense. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists. In an instant, the blood-killing plate armor that he had thrown aside was reshaped into a scarlet flowing light, flowing around him and then turning into the scarlet armor again. Automatically, the armor covered the whole body of Jian Wushuang, including his head. Boom! Then the third sacred thunder struck onto Jian Wushuang heavily. The annihilatory power it produced was far more destructive than the previous ones. But thanks to Jian Wushuang's blood-killing plate armor, the power of the sacred thunder was weakened sharply to 1/10. The remaining power didn't cause much damage to Jian Wushuang. Carry on. With tightly clenched hands, Jian Wushuang stood there looking up to the endless heaven. He roared with a firm determination, and his voice reverberated through the whole universe. Those watching Jian Wushuang all became speechless. They had witnessed him get through 3 sacred thunders already. Formidable power. Formidable Jian Wushuang. Chapter 13:16, Breakthrough with Power, Deal with Another 3 Strikes. Chapter 13:16, Breakthrough with Power, Deal with Another 3 Strikes. Rumble. In the void, the thundercloud continued to churn and the originally terrifying pressure became worse. Under a normal situation, even when one undergo God's test in the third heaven, they would only come across 3 strikes of lightning if it was thunder test. But then Jian Wushuang, who was undergoing his God's test in the first heaven, had already been through 3 strikes of lightning. After the 3 strikes of lightning, the inverse cultivation test didn't end there but looked as though it had just begun. As everyone held their breath, in the depth of the thundercloud, the 4th divine lightning was brewing. Plus, When the fourth bolt of lightning was brewing, it obviously took longer than the third strike. Rumble. The fourth divine lightning finally descended. Wow. A huge crimson lightning rumbled and struck towards Jian Wushuang like a snake. Crimson divine lighting? The experts surrounding tribunal passing pinnacle revealed a terrified expression. Jian Wushuang's face grew grave, as he could feel that the crimson divine lightning was far greater than the previous 3 strikes. It was on an entirely different level. Regarding the diving lightning, Jian Wushuang didn't resist it with his divine body recklessly. The very moment the divine lightning struck, there was a flash of gold light from his eyes. Rumble. The billowing power of ancient gods suddenly surged. Jian Wushuang looked cold as the boundless ancient god power converged on the index finger of his right hand. Then, the index finger, which was covered entirely by the golden energy, suddenly spurted. The third finger of ancient god, destroy the world. Rumble. The sudden crack in the void expanded into a huge black hole. In the black hole, there was an ancient god figure which was tens of thousand meters tall and shimmering in gold that appeared from nowhere. The ancient god condensed into a substantial figure from an imaginary shadow at the beginning. His strong feet stepped on the ground and he roared when he pointed his ridiculously huge index finger. The third finger of ancient god. The power to destroy the world. Before everyone's terrified gazes, the huge gilded finger and the crimson lightning descended from above collided. Bang! The 2 terrifying powers exploded. Both contained the power to destroy the world. The terrifying impact shook the void. The gilded ancient god forcefully broke the crimson divine lightning. Even though there was partial crimson lightning that gushed onto Jian Wushuang, it wasn't enough to pose a threat for Jian Wushuang. The fourth divine lightning was broken apart by Jian Wushuang. After the fourth strike, rumble. Without any interval nor time for formation, the fifth divine lightning struck immediately. It was also a crimson lightning, but it was a great increment of power. There was fire in Jian Wushuang's eyes. The ancient god power in his body had depleted almost 80% after he performed the third finger technique. He naturally couldn't pull the same trick again. Then, the Blood Mountain sword appeared in his hand. It was the first time Jian Wushuang took out the Blood Mountain sword since he started the inverse cultivation test. It was as though the sword felt Jian Wushuang's feelings. After the Blood Mountain sword appeared, it gave out a shrill buzz. It was like it was roaring, bellowing in anger. Good brother, let's do this. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly and raised Blood Mountain sword with both his hands. The terrifying sword power spread from his body and soared up into the sky. Eternal light. Jian Wushuang bellowed without hesitation and put the rank 1 strongest unique skill that he had created 120 years ago to play. Suddenly, a brilliantly beautiful light shined. When the light shined, it was as though it formed eternity and didn't go away from the universe for very long. In the end, it finally clashed against the fifth divine lightning that was descending from the sky. Bang! The universe shook vigorously. The ground under Jian Wushuang's feet cracked and the terrifying crimson lightning formed a superstorm above the peak of the tribunal passing pinnacle. However, the core strength of the fifth divine lighting shattered by the hit of the brilliantly beautiful light. After the fifth divine lightning, rumble. The sixth divine lightning followed closely behind without giving Jian Wushuang any time to catch his breath. Jian Wushuang looked cold. As the Blood Mountain sword shook vigorously in his hand, there was an unprecedented madness twinkling in his eyes. Buzz! A shapeless power swept out from Jian Wushuang's body. The power seemed illusory and almost no one noticed it. However, it was extremely extensive at the same time. Along with Jian Wushuang wielding his sword tightly, the shapeless power exploded the very next second. Dragon roar! Jian Wushuang's eyes were giving out. Roar! A towering dragon roar was heard across the sky. Everyone held their breath as they watched, and there was a dark gray giant dragon that appeared out of nowhere. The dark gray giant dragon had an unprecedented rage and a miraculous power that plundered toward the sixth divine lightning with madness. Rank 1 Strongest Unique Skill. Dragon Roar. Jian Wushuang invented the technique after he had spent 120 years resolving the Little Scattered Stars game and increased his understanding toward sword principle. The technique was different from Eternal Light, as Eternal Light was an absolute power. Dragon Roar was a combination of soul power and sword principle. On top of that, it mainly depended on soul power. The dark gray giant dragon was formed and substantiated through Jian Wushuang's soul power. The soul power was immeasurably extensive. The combination of a giant dragon substantiated through soul power and impressive sword principle structured the terrifying technique. By performing this technique alone, Jian Wushuang's soul power was exhausted entirely. In the air, the dark gray giant dragon finally collided with the sixth divine lightning descended from the sky. During the collision, the dark gray giant dragon opened its mouth and swallowed the sixth divine lightning. When the divine lightning entered the dark gray giant dragon's body, the terrifying power erupted and its huge body suddenly exploded. However, the power of the sixth lightning was used up as well. Hence, it dispersed in the end. The sixth diving lightning was forcefully broken apart as well. Everyone was in awe. The people who are watching Jian Wushuang going through God's test outside Tribunal Passing Pinnacle was all left speechless in shock. They originally thought the fourth divine lightning was extremely scary and it'd be difficult for Jian Wushuang to resist. Who knows? After the fourth divine lightning, the fifth and the sixth divine lightning struck without interval. Even so, Jian Wushuang performed a strong power. He broke through with his power and resolved all three divine lightnings directly. The terrifying power. That's Jian Wushuang. Chapter 13:17, Spared No Efforts. Chapter 13:17, Spared No Efforts. Boom! 3 sacred thunders had shot down from the heavens one after another. However, the huge thundercloud showed no signs of dissipating. Instead, it began to slowly form the next sacred thunder. Another one. How come? This is impossible. All cried out in astonishment. Even the experienced master of the Dayu Palace and Lord Wuzong had never seen many cases. Why would only a universe master have to continuously receive more than 6 horrible sacred thunders just in his first part of the God test? The 7 sacred thunders. It is definitely an unusual God test. Bang! Under the gaze of all, the thundercloud shot a brand new sacred thunder again. And after seeing the 7th sacred thunder, everyone's eyes were wide open. It was also of crimson color, but different from the last one. This crimson sacred thunder was accompanied by a stream of green fire. That small fire scared everyone. It's a fire test. Oh my goodness! The crowd cried out. Jian Wushuang was also alarmed. He couldn't be more familiar with that green flame. He remembered that Dong Men Universe God, who could have resisted the second sacred thunder, was burnt to die because of that little stream of green fire. What's worse, the fire that Jian Wushuang met this time was far larger than that of Dong Men Universe God's test. Is the most dangerous part of the inverse cultivation test coming? Jian Wushuang stared at the heavens. Even though the 7 sacred thunders seemed creepy, Jian Wushuang didn't feel afraid at all. He was ready to embrace the challenge no matter how difficult it was. Come on! Jian Wushuang got several elixirs in his hands by using his magic power. He had collected those elixirs exclusively for the inverse cultivation. Each of them was very precious. With the help of elixirs, Jian Wushuang's weak body recovered soon. Then he took out another 2 treasures. They were the Blaze Quicksand Gourd and the Dark Green Bell. He once lent Blaze Quicksand Gourd to Master of the Dayu Palace and didn't take it back even when he would battle with Qingyang Universe God. And the Master of the Dayu Palace hadn't returned to him until 20 years ago. Now this treasure might help Jian Wushuang in his inverse cultivation. As he opened the Blaze Quicksand Gourd, a large amount of Blaze Quicksand gushed out. The blaze quicksand flew at a crazy speed to the seventh sacred thunder, which helped to weaken its power and lower its speed. And the small dark green bell on his other hand transformed itself into an enormous ancient bell. Immovable mountain. Jian Wushuang murmured a spell, catalyzing the secret skill of the dark green bell. Immediately, this green bell produced a green halo, which surrounded the whole body of Jian Wushuang. Boom! The seventh sacred thunder came with irresistible force. It went through the blaze quicksand and instantly struck the bell, producing a low and deep sound. The bell violently shook, with a crack appearing on the surface. And the crack became larger and larger at an alarming rate, and finally it burst. However, the seventh sacred thunder, as well as the green fire within it, was still powerful and continued to attack Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang felt shocked, and he tried his best to mobilize all his remaining power. Go, Blood Mountain Sword! Jian Wushuang generated all his power into the Blood Mountain Sword and ordered it to collide with the seventh sacred thunder. This time, the collision slashed the power of the seventh sacred thunder by more than half. Only a tiny fraction of power, along with a small part of the green fire, rushed to Jian Wushuang. At this moment, Jian Wushuang was instantly equipped with the blood-killing plate armor. Bang! Despite being weakened by the blood-killing plate armor, the burning green fire was still furious enough and caused great pain to Jian Wushuang. Oh! Jian Wushuang spit a large amount of blood and went pale immediately as the green fire also went out. Finally, Jian Wushuang successfully resisted the seventh sacred thunder. But only after a moment, Jian Wushuang found that deep in the heaven, the eighth sacred thunder was simmering. The eighth! There was nothing but dead silence among the talents who were watching. Jian Wushuang didn't expect that either. Now nothing is left except the tribunal passing elixir. Soon, another elixir turned up in his hand. The invaluable tribunal passing elixir. It was prepared especially for the God test, in which Jian Wushuang could recover his power to 100% within an instant. An extraordinary elixir. But only one elixir could be taken in one test. That was why Jian Wushuang didn't swallow this elixir when he exhausted almost all of his power under the attack of the fourth, the fifth and the sixth sacred thunder. But this time, he had no choice. He swallowed it without any hesitation. As soon as he swallowed the elixir, he recovered his power at an astonishing speed, faster than that with the help of King of Venomous Worms. One extraordinary function of the tribunal passing elixir is transforming the power of the surrounding sacred thunders into my power. No wonder I was told that it could only play a role in the God test. Wonderful! Jian Wushuang's power reached its best now. However, his ancient God power and soul power was still exhausted because the elixir could only be used to help recover spiritual power. Right at the moment when Jian Wushuang fully recovered his spiritual power, a booming sound shook the universe. The eighth sacred thunder arrived, completely composed of green fire. The fire test. The entire fire test. Chapter 13:18, The Last Bolt of Lightning. Chapter 13:18, The Last Bolt of Lightning. Fire test. It was a complete fire test. The moment it took shape, everyone on the scene was shaken. Jian Wushuang's expression looked extremely solemn. He watched as the fire test slowly descended. Vroom! The terrifying flames suddenly swept out from Jian Wushuang's body. Suddenly, the universe became a scarlet fire sea. Jian Wushuang stood right at the core of the scarlet fire sea. The scarlet flame submitted to him, and he was the king of the scarlet fire sea. That is, Scarlet Kingdom? It's Scarlet Kingdom, the secret skill that the island of Secret Island gained fame with. The master of Scarlet Island passed down Scarlet Kingdom to him. Many experts that recognized the Scarlet Fire Sea couldn't help but gasp. Scarlet Kingdom was quite famous in the Dayu world. The master of Scarlet Island swept over Dayu world with the secret skill, and he was all and might among universe gods in the second heaven. Then, Jian Wushuang learned the secret skill and he performed the secret skill as he underwent God's test. He used the Scarlet Fire Sea to fight against the horrifying fire test that was descending from the void above. Come on! Jian Wushuang gripped Blood Mountain sword in his hand tightly as he bellowed. The Scarlet Fire Sea surged as though it too was roaring in anger and giving vent to its unhappiness. The next moment he held the handle of Blood Mountain sword with both of his hands. A surging sword aura that made people hold their breath was given out from Jian Wushuang's body. The Blood Mountain sword was also trembling in rage. After I cultivated in seclusion for a century, I accumulated swordsmanship through resolving the Little Scattered Stars game, and spent another dozen of years to constantly digest and understand. Then I finally created the stroke technique. I created this stroke technique specifically for the inverse cultivation test. It is born to fight the test and it exists to resolve the test. Its name is Test Wrecker. Jian Wushuang mumbled. The moment he finished talking, an unprecedented brightness flashed from his eyes. He gripped his Blood Mountain sword tightly as he waved it without hesitation. Buzz! A cold, ear-piercing noise was heard across the universe. It was extremely shrill, as though someone were roaring hysterically. A cold sword light that was eye-catching suddenly lit up. That is a rank 2 unique skill. The experts outside Tribunal Passing Pinnacle stared. The sword light appeared and was followed by dark whirlpool forming around it. There was an unprecedented rage and determination along with Jian Wushuang's billowing fighting spirit and unhappiness. Surrounded by the Scarlet Fire Sea, it suddenly collided with the emerald green fire test descending from the sky above. Poof! There wasn't the clashing noise that they imagined there'd be, nor was there any terrifying pressure that spread around. The moment the two collided, it started melting at a terrifying speed. The boundless emerald green flame burned everything mercilessly. The sword technique that Jian Wushuang performed earlier was extremely fierce, and it was the strongest stroke he had performed as of then. It was a full-force stroke with the assistance of Scarlet Kingdom. However, he was facing a real fire test. Among the three gods test, the fire test was in second place. Its scary level wasn't comparable to thunder test. Looking at the cold sword light melting at a shocking speed, it disappeared entirely very soon. However, the divine lightning that was formed with emerald green flame had parts of its power left and it surged towards Jian Wushuang. Virum. The emerald green flame came into contact with blood-killing plate armor and suddenly started burning crazily. Even though it was separated by the blood-killing plate armor, Jian Wushuang could still feel the blood all over his body and all his organs were burning altogether. Humph! A coolness grew, and the soul power in Jian Wushuang's body spurted out and wrapped around the emerald green flame on the surface of his body. Poof, poof, poof! An enormous amount of soul power was burning mercilessly, but the emerald green flame gradually slowed down. Wow! Jian Wushuang suddenly spat 2 mouthfuls of blood. His face grew pale and his body started quivering. He looked like he couldn't stand straight on his feet. But the very next moment he lifted his head. He could clearly feel that the thundercloud in the void above had started brewing again. The movement of brewing was much bigger than the previous 8 times of divine lightning. Is it the last strike? Jian Wushuang's pupil contracted and he waved his hand directly to wipe away the blood on the corner of his lips. Then he stood straight. Even though his divine body was severely damaged under the 8 strikes of divine lightning and he couldn't stand firmly, he was still standing proudly. He, from when he was born till now, no matter what kind of danger or hardship he faced, never backed off. Such firmness and determination, that's Jian Wushuang. Looking at the thundercloud's transformation, everyone outside of Tribunal Passing Pinnacle was stirred. There's a 9th strike. There's one last one. This is the last test. Everyone gripped their fist and they were shouting at the bottom of their heart. They were glad that they didn't come across such terrifying God's test. At the same time, they were also looking forward, looking forward to Jian Wuxuan, who had created a lot of miracles in the God's test, to create another miracle in order to cross the last move. The last divine lightning, it should be the strongest strike. The master of Dayu Palace too clenched his fist as his eyes beamed with excitement. The first God test, and he encounters a total of 9 bolts of divine lightning. This is unbelievable. If he were to die at the last divine lightning, it ends here. However, if he were to pass this, his achievement after this would be unpredictable. Wu Tsang clenched his teeth and thought excitedly. Jian Wuxuan, one last one. You must pass this last move no matter what. King of Venomous Worms, who was hiding deep in the ground, was watching Jian Wuxuan all this while. He was also cheering him up at that very moment. Pass it. It's the last, don't give up. You can do it. The experts surrounding Tribunal Passing Pinnacle started cheering for Jian Wuxuan in their heart too. The God's test that day sent all the spectators to astonishment. Jian Wuxuan revealed his capability and stubbornness in the God's test, and he turned people around. Even Universe God Jiuhai and the Master of Golden Sun sect, who harbored deep-seated grudges against Jian Wuxuan, were impressed with Jian Wuxuan's performance in the God's test, even though they wanted Jian Wuxuan to die in the God's test. On the peak of Tribunal Passing Pinnacle, Jian Wuxuan lifted his head to look at the sky above. His body trembled faintly, and he felt every living thing in the universe was cheering for him. The last bolt of divine lightning. Life or death relies on this move. Chapter 1399 Sacred Thunders and 3 Tests All at Once. Chapter 1319 9 Sacred Thunders and 3 Tests All at Once. Boom! The 9th sacred thunder, which had drawn everyone's attention, finally stopped simmering. The last sacred thunder could determine whether Jian Wuxuan could survive. It gradually revealed its formidable force. At that moment, the dark clouds separated from each other, from which 2 flashes of dazzling light. One flash of light was endlessly dark and the other, deep green. 2 sacred thunders. These 2 flashes of light staggered all of the talents who were watching. They knew there were 2 sacred thunders. And the endless dark one was the most powerful dark sacred thunder, and carried an annihilatory power. And the deep green one was an entire fire test sacred thunder. A deep green fire test. They arrive at the same time. Astonishing. Everyone was speechless. Generally speaking, 3 kinds of God test came separately. Occasionally, the thunder test came with a trace of fire, only a small trace. But now an entire dark sacred thunder and a fire test sacred thunder came simultaneously. Worse still, Jian Wuxuan felt a sense of anxiety. The anxiety came without a sign. Actually, he had been able to stay calm in any dangerous situation after he had tackled so many challenges. Even at the brink of death, he had always been calm without even a trace of anxiety. But now, he was upset, and this irritability intensified, directly affecting his emotions and even his control of his own power. At this moment, Jian Wuxuan found it extremely difficult to control his own spiritual power. Shit! He bit his lips violently, causing a great pain that made his mind clearer. However, his face became completely distorted and horrible. The eyes were also full of unprecedented aggression and madness. A dark fog containing a mysterious power slowly rose in his body, triggering his irritation and conquering him. Bystanders outside the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle didn't know what was happening. What is he doing? What on earth is going on? What is happening? Many practitioners who were watching felt confused. Only a few distinguished gods, including the Master of Dayu Palace and Lord Wu Tsang, knew what happened. They were shocked. It's a mind test. Really? Even Master of the Dayu Palace, the supreme god in the Dayu universe, felt amazed and exclaimed. A mind test. Everyone was shocked when they knew what was exactly happening. It was true. A mind test. The most difficult one among the 3 kinds of God tests, and also the one that had been rarely seen. It was said that only a vicious sinner taking numerous lives would meet with the mind test, with a certain yet low possibility. Within the long history of the Dayu universe, the mind test had never happened at all. That was why Master of the Dayu Palace didn't know much about it and had only mentioned a little information in classes. And now, Jian Wushuang was receiving the mind test. Furthermore, it came with the thunder test and the fire test. 3 kinds of test came to the same person at the same time. How can it be possible? This is impossible. The usually indifferent and calm Lord Wu Tsong couldn't help crying out. Why is only the first part of the God test already so catastrophic? I have never heard about this. Under normal circumstances, no matter how a cultivator is genius or vicious, he will never meet with such horrible test. Unless Lord Wu Tsong figured out one possibility. More specifically, he was reminded of a legend. Unless Jian Wushuang is undergoing the so-called inverse cultivation test. Lord Wu Tsong felt staggered. Inverse cultivation test? Master of the Dayu Palace couldn't believe what he heard. Inverse cultivation test. The most horrible God test in the eternal chaotic world. Also the most unique one. And the God test for universe gods was the most deadly in the inverse cultivation test. Even though Master of the Dayu Palace and Lord Wu Tsong were experienced, they had just heard of inverse cultivation but never seen it, let alone the inverse cultivation test. And now they realized that Jian Wushuang was receiving the inverse cultivation test. Only this could explain why the undergoing test was so horrible. Jian Wushuang was practicing inverse cultivation. Master of the Dayu Palace and Lord Wu Tsong clenched their hands excitedly. They were now sure of who Jian Wushuang was. Now on the peak of the tribulation passing pinnacle, the dark fog had already covered the whole body of Jian Wushuang, whose breath was getting more and more violent. Uhu! He roared with a distorted face. He roared with an unprecedented determination. He didn't want to lose. He didn't want to end his cultivation journey right now. He didn't want to die. After all, there were still many things for him to accomplish. He hadn't met Shuang Er. He hadn't known who his master was. He could not die. Chapter 1320 Alive or Dead? Chapter 1320 Alive or Dead? Outside the tribunal passing pinnacle, countless experts held their breath as they watched everything that was happening on the tribunal passing pinnacle. They could feel Jian Wushuang's rage clearly, and they could tell how tough the test was that Jian Wushuang was going through. But at that very moment, Jian Wushuang, who was mad, suddenly lifted his head and stared into the void before him with his bloodshot eyes. In those bloodshot eyes, they were covered in a murderous aura and madness. However, there was a stronger sense of determination. I, Jian Wushuang, cultivated till today. I have been following my conscience whenever I do anything. Although I have killed many, those who are killed deserved it. I never fail my conscience. I never fail anyone. Nor have I failed the way of heaven. Now, you are trying to influence me with just the devil? Dream on. Jian Wushuang's shrill scream was heard across the universe. The very moment he shouted, he hammered his chest with his fist. Poof! Jian Wushuang spat a mouthful of blood, but it stimulated his consciousness with the sharp pain. In turn, it suppressed the devil in him that was growing. Followed by Jian Wushuang's willpower, the star power that had regathered in his body for the past century suddenly erupted. The secret skill of Star Palace was suddenly carried out. At the same time, Jian Wushuang waved his hand and a scroll appeared from nowhere. It was the Chaos Divine Treasure, Mountain River Map. Up! Jian Wushuang bellowed and the power of Star suddenly erupted along with the remaining soul power in his body. Then, it flowed towards the Mountain River Map without holding back. Under the drive of the soul power, the Mountain River Map opened directly. The very next moment, Virum! The extreme power of the dark and light combined together flawlessly, and a swirling vortex of black and white appeared from nowhere. The swirling vortex immediately covered a range of hundreds of thousand miles the moment it appeared, and it ceaselessly grew larger in lightning speed while Jian Wushuang was positioned right in the middle of the whirlpool. The grand formation of the enduring samsara. It was the most impressive technique of Master Xian Yi, Jian Wushuang's master. He forcefully refined the grand formation of the enduring samsara within the mountain river map. The formation refined and suddenly became a technique that the mountain river map that could use. Different from the 9-province seal, the grand formation of the enduring samsara could both attack and defend. Jian Wushuang could only put the technique to play when he disregarded the cost. In collaboration with the eruption of the secret skill of Star Palace, it became Jian Wushuang's strongest trump card. Then he used the trump card to resist the thunder test and fire test that descended from the sky. Come on. Jian Wushuang was persistent. His entire body and mind were drowning in the struggle of the mind test. In the outer world, the two lightning rods and the huge swirling vortex of black and white clashed before every cultivator's eyes. Boom! The explosion was heard across the universe. The scary whistle spread, and the experts surrounding Tribunal Passing Pinnacle felt a sharp pain in their eyes. Boundless dark lighting and emerald flame filled every corner of Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. Poof, poof, poof. The spine-chilling sight took place. The peak of Tribunal Passing Pinnacle, which was specially designated for undergoing God's test, started disappearing at a speed which one could see with naked eyes. Yes, disappear. From the top to the bottom, the entire peak was eaten up by the emerald flames mercilessly. While Jian Wushuang, who was on the peak, was naturally within the scope of the disaster. It only took a brief moment until everything slowed down. Everyone saw that the peak of Tribunal Passing Pinnacle had disappeared entirely. Not only the peak, but even half of the hillsides were also taken down. The only part remaining was the bottom half of the Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. Silence. The entire universe was in dead silence. Everyone was shocked and was left speechless. The terrifying God's test, an unprecedented God's test, shocked everyone. Every expert from all over the world only came back to reality after a long pause. The moment they came back to reality, they immediately looked towards the Tribunal Passing Pinnacle that was beyond recognition. Jian Wushuang? Where's Jian Wushuang? Everyone stared at the huge pit on Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. The pit was so deep that they couldn't see the bottom. With their naked eyes, they couldn't see the bottom clearly. They could only rely on their own consciousness to feel. They tried to feel. No sound. No sound at all. Is he dead? Everyone became silent. They couldn't feel any movement on Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. It meant that Jian Wushuang passed away. Sigh. The master of Scarlet Island sighed, but his emotion was extremely complicated. Those behind the master of Scarlet Island were universe gods from the Scarlet Island. They exchanged glances and shook their head. God's test was a situation which, out of 10, 1 would survive and 9 would be dead. Hence, they were mentally prepared beforehand. However, when Jian Wushuang revealed his impressive ability during the process of undergoing God's test, they were looking forward to Jian Wushuang passing through it. Because once he passed through, it represented the birth of a true expert. But in the end, he failed. Sigh. Universe God Jiuhai from Holy Prefecture let out a heavy breath. Luckily he failed in the end. Otherwise, Universe God Jiuhai exclaimed. He recalled the process of the God's test, and he who was a universe god in the second heaven was shocked too. He couldn't imagine what he would do if Jian Wushuang passes through the God's test. By then, would he still have the guts to look for Jian Wushuang to take revenge? Luckily, Jian Wushuang failed. Hence, whatever it was, it naturally wouldn't happen. The master of Dayu Palace and Wu Tsong stood side by side in the void above. It's such a pity, the master of Dayu Palace let out a sigh. It's really a pity, Wu Tsong nodded solemnly, a true prodigy. There might not be anyone from Snow Dojo who could be compared favorably with him. If he were to pass through the inverse cultivation test, he was destined to become a real peak expert. He is definitely far beyond me, but he failed in the end. Of course, we can't blame him. The inverse cultivation test was really too scary. Thinking of the inverse cultivation test that Jian Wushuang had been through, Wu Cong still felt astonished. The inverse cultivation test was a definite nightmare. Everyone sighed. Everyone sighed with respect. More so that everyone thought it was regrettable for Jian Wushuang. At the depth of the pit, King of Venomous Worms stared at Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. Jian Wushuang. No way, it's impossible. If you were to really be dead, I, as your parasite, should definitely feel something. But I don't feel anything. We still maintain a string of connection. It means that you aren't dead. King of Venomous King was emotional and his mind and body were trembling. He let out his sensing power and tried his best to look for Jian Wushuang's whereabouts. In a brief moment, the King of Venomous Worms felt an extremely weak aura that might vanish into thin air at any time in the deepest part of the huge pit on Tribunal Passing Pinnacle. Chapter 1321. The Sacred Lights Came. Chapter 1321. The Sacred Lights Came. He is here. King of Venomous Worms went wild with joy. Although King of Venomous Worms hadn't recovered his power to 100%, his power to recover and detect was still incomparable. Even universe gods in the third heaven didn't have the power to detect as well as him. Therefore, when everyone else believed that Jian Wushuang had died, King of Venomous Worms could detect his breath. Jian Wushuang was still breathing. No matter how weak the breath was, he was still alive. Huh? You are still alive. King of Venomous Worms was extremely happy, but he didn't rush to help Jian Wushuang recover. Because he knew that Jian Wushuang was able to recover himself. King of Venomous Worms looked at the sky. I guess the sacred light is coming. However, the huge, dark cloud was still staying in the heavens, showing no signs of dissipating. Why is that? Why don't the clouds dissipate? Cultivators outside the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle felt something unexpected. Under normal circumstances, the thunderclouds would dissipate after the cultivators died in the God test. Just like the situation where Dong Men Universe God died in the God test. But now the clouds were still there, while others could feel the breath of Jian Wushuang. Maybe Jian Wushuang was still alive. A universe god guessed, surprising others around him. Didn't he die? But if he didn't die, why can't others feel his breath? Boom! At the moment, a huge thundercloud split. What? Everyone looked up to the heavens, seeing and sensing a golden light from the splitting thunderclouds. A golden light as bright as the sun, providing everyone comfortable warmth. The sacred light? Everyone's eyes were wide open. The sacred light would come and shine on the cultivators who passed the God test, helping them recover and transform their power. Everyone was familiar with that light. And now it had arrived. Jian Wushuang is still alive. Master of the Scarlet Island exclaimed. Many other universe gods also raised their heads. How can it be possible? Universe god Jiu Hai felt nervous. Even Master of the Dayu Palace and Lord Wu Cong also felt surprised by the light. They had just thought that Jian Wushuang had died. But now, the light was coming. And he was still alive. Boom, 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 boom. The heaven roared 9 times as the golden light in the splitting thunderclouds got denser and brighter, and then was divided into 9 flashes. Each one of the 9 flashes, huge and colorful, gushed right into the bottom of the huge hole in the Tribulation Passing Pinnacle. 9 sacred lights coming at the same time. 9 sacred lights. Everyone became breathless. The sacred light, containing tremendous power, helped cultivators recover and transform their power. Generally speaking, cultivators who pass the God test of the first heaven only receive 1 sacred light. The second heaven too. And the lights were usually narrow. But now 9 sacred lights came at the same time. The size of each was 1/10 as large as normal ones. What did this mean? Master of the Dayu Palace said, "The more difficult the god test is, the more benefits after that. I remember I received 3 sacred lights a meter wide after the fire test, which already brought me huge benefits. And now, after such a horrible inverse cultivation test, Jian Wushuang will certainly get far more benefits than we could imagine. I wonder how powerful he could become after receiving 9 sacred lights." Lord Wuzong was excited. Others cultivators were amazed and also admired Jian Wushuang. They were all waiting to see Jian Wushuang receive the sacred lights. Half of the tribulation passing pinnacle was destroying, leaving a huge, dark and lifeless hole. Right at the bottom of the hole, Jian Wushuang was lying there, injured and weak. Despite the protection of the blood-killing plate armor, the powerful sacred thunder struck Jian Wushuang, nearly tearing him apart and burning his skin. Thanks to his inverse cultivation and the experience of immortality, Jian Wushuang became extremely resilient, which explained why he survived such a devastating attack. Others, including universe gods in the third heaven like Master of Dayu Palace, couldn't have been as lucky as Jian Wushuang under the same attack. How lucky am I? Jian Wushuang lay there extremely weak, but he smiled happily at this moment. He was delighted for his achievement. Although he had almost died, he now survived and got away with death. He had passed the first part of the inverse cultivation test. Now he was blessed by the 9 sacred lights. The power of warmth went into the body of Jian Wushuang, relieving his great pain and making him comfortable. He was embracing the sacred lights, safe and sound. The 9 sacred lights cradled him just as a kind mother would for her child. Thanks to the lights, Jian Wushuang recovered himself just within a moment, several times faster than King of Venomous Worms. And soon, Jian Wushuang started to transform himself. That you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.